right, we are here today to discuss the new RPA. We have gone from our 10-page RPA to a new 16 page RPA, and that is being launched tomorrow. So this is good that you are on here today. I see some of you have actually had attended previous trainings, so this is a good refresher. And for the others of you maybe haven't seen it at all, so it's a good thing that you're jumping in today to make sure you are ready to start writing new contracts tomorrow. And this has been a couple of years in the making from CAR. Our last major revision was in 2014. So now we've been 7 years in. And I've had people ask, is there a red line version of this document? No, not really is the answer, because what they did is they were doing red line versions with each revision, and they did 25 revisions to get to this. So there is no red line version of what we had before, or what we currently have as of today, redlined until now. There's none of that. So you're going to have to just dig in here with me, and also sorry, I was answering something in the chat. Dig in here with me and make your notes, and you'll be able to follow along and be ready for the RPA come tomorrow. Sorry, I've got one person had a specific question I need to reply to here privately, just to make sure that they get in. There we go. Sorry about that. All right. So getting ready for tomorrow. This is the new RPA. So have it out and ready to take notes. Did want to let you know a couple things. And in addition to the RPA being revised, Zip Forms is actually changing and revising their editor. So if you log into, supposed to launch at the same time tomorrow. So if you get in there tomorrow, for those of you who use Zip Forms as opposed to SkySlope, if you're using Zip Forms, you will see a new editor starting hopefully tomorrow. It's my understanding. I haven't seen it in action, but I've heard about it. You will note when we get started on this, or if you've got it in front of you, that we've got this new thing called the grid. And the new Zip Form editor is going to let you toggle between the grid and the associated paragraph that is referenced, as well as having just a slightly different way of inputting your information. So do be aware and don't be frightened if you see that the Zip Forms editor looks a bit different when you jump in there as well. In addition to the new RPA, there's quite a few forms revisions. I understand there's over 60 ancillary forms that have been either revised or are new. We also have several retired documents. So CAR actually does have the quick guide on that. I'm going to show you really quickly, and we can, I will get this in the chat in probably on one of our breaks, but you can see, let me go over to Adobe. You can see that they have put out a quick summary of the forms release. You'll notice these quick summaries are usually a page, maybe a page and a half, but we've got 4 pages here, including all of these all this long list that are being have minor revisions, basically just reflecting some of the updates and updated paragraph numbers and such in the RPA. We have several discontinued forms as well. So we are not, of course, going to go into all of those ancillary documents today, otherwise we would be here until Christmas. So I want to get you out of here on time. So we're not going to be touching on those, but I just want to make note of that, because if you are filling out your RPA and need to include an ancillary document, please make sure that you are looking at those closely so that you know what you're filling out. Just be very aware that many of them have changes. There are red line versions of the ancillary documents. And so we will get the link out to you so that you can reference the red line versions of those if you would like, as well as that quick summary. And again, all of that launches tomorrow. All right, so with that, we are going to jump right in. Again, one last moment of housekeeping. If you could please make sure that you are muted. And then if you have a question, if you would please either raise your hand and I will call on you when we get to a stopping point, or you put it in the chat and we'll keep a close eye on it there. All right, and with that, we're going to get going. So let me get over here and let's get ready to look at our RPA. Make sure my Zoom controls are out of the way for the, excuse me, just a moment. All right, everybody see purchase agreement, I hope. All right, here we go. We will start at the top. And again, just to let you know, we're going to start today. We're going to really dig into primarily the changes and anything new or expanded language that they are incorporating in this new RPA. So this is not a deep dive into every single paragraph. We're going with the assumption that you have some working knowledge of the existing purchase agreement, and we're primarily going to focus on the changes. And that's how we will get through this even still in about 3.5 hours. So hang in there with me and we'll get through it. All right, starting with the top, obviously date prepared, that's the same as it is now, but I always like to point out that this is for reference point only. There are no contractual obligations associated with this date, right? This is an offer from, again, that looks the same, but they do want to note, CAR wants you to note that using a shorthand version of an entity name is acceptable, because you will see there's a section in the end of the document, which we will get to later in the training, which will give you the opportunity to add in the full name of the buyer, as is included in the entity. That would be in section paragraph 32. So it's perfectly acceptable to use a shorthand version. So for example, we see frequently if it's a trust, perhaps, that it's the John L. Smith and Karen S. Scott Family Trust dated 2005, right? You could actually shorten that down to the John and Karen Trust, whatever. You don't have to put in the date and all of that in here. You can add that in later. One thing we also want to note, and this is not a change, but something that I do still sometimes see, and I want to make sure we're all filling these out appropriately. You do not write assignee on here. That is something that was used many, many years ago. And then I do still sometimes see contracts come across that way where it'll say John Smith or assignee. Right? The opportunity for assignment is already built into this contract. So you don't need to put assignee in here as an option. And in fact, you need to use the language of assignee that is already referenced in the paragraphs, and you'll be able to, we'll dig into that in a bit later, but please don't write in or assignee, okay? This is to be a specific buyer. If it is an assignee that will be coming into play, there's an additional document that's used to specify who it is. So we'll get into that in a little bit later. All right, this is a property information, it looks the same. And then the assessor parcel number, now you will see it has an S so that you can add multiple APNs. Occasionally we see that. You will notice section 1 does not include the price or the COE as it does now. Instead, those are going to be down here in the grid. Okay, moving into section 2. Agency, this is actually basically the same as it is now. I do want to note that it is very important that this gets filled out completely. Our brokers and file reviewers will definitely kick that back. If you have a contract where it is either not filled out correctly, or if you receive one that is not filled out correctly, then you must use an agency confirmation form that would have to go over in a counteroffer to complete this. So it is very important. This is part of the civil code that we have the agency confirmation identified right up front. And so please fill this out completely and save yourself or your affiliated broker time in having to deal with a counteroffer. So don't get lazy on the front end, just get it right in the first place. You will see down here, section 2C is a new line. So you would check a box if more than one brokerage represents buyer or seller, and then the ABA form would get pulled in. This is brokerage, not agent. So if you have if you're doing a partnership with an agent within Dillback, and there's 2 of you on the transaction, this is not where you would, this is not a box you would check. This would only be used if it's more than one brokerage representing a single party. So if you were perhaps co-listing with, a Coldwell Banker agent or something like that, that's where you would utilize this checkbox. Section D, 2D, the PRBS will continue to be part of the contract. It's default to being checked. You cannot uncheck it. That one continues to pull forward. All right, and with that, we get into section 3. Section 3 is called the grid. We will use the term the grid quite a lot over, now forever. You will probably now and forevermore, as long as we have this version of the RPA, be utilizing the term the grid. So this is what it is. I wanted to explain to you how you read this and reference it if you were to do, for example, a counteroffer. So the item number is 3, and it will be A, this first column on the left. 3A is our price. For example, 3E1 is the loan amount. 3E3 is the occupancy type. And so this is how you would read and reference if you are wanting to make a counteroffer or an addendum or amendment later. The paragraph number over here is the associated paragraph later in the document that has all of the details associated with this specific line. So we would look at paragraph 5A2 for information about increased deposit. So remember when I said the zip forms editor is getting updated, that is to allow you to toggle between this section of the grid and, for example, section 5A of the paragraph sections. So hopefully that makes sense. If anyone wants more detail on that, please feel free to speak up, but hopefully it makes perfect sense to you. Again, then of course we're going to go across. It'll be paragraph terms and additional terms. It's pretty much the same throughout the grid. So of course, right up front, we have purchase price and a checkbox here for all cash. Close of escrow, it will be days after acceptance or date. And this is the spot where I like to explain to you that they have a way of referencing items that are specific terms within the contract. So you'll see this is days with a capital D. That means it's days as it relates to the way it is defined in the back of the contract in the glossary. So anytime you see days with a capital D within the contract, that is the specific form of days, which is again, how it is identified in the glossary. If it is lowercase d, then you're just calendar days. Lowercase d on the date, again, calendar days, but days with a capital D is a specific way of counting days. And we'll touch on that later. But there's a few other places in here where it has capital versus not capital. Okay, real quick, we did have a question in the chat. In a counteroffer, we would specify the grid paragraph number. Yes, that is correct. So if you wanted to change something, for example, if you want the purchase price to be, if you're countering the purchase price, you would say section 3A to be, $900,000. Now we would also put purchase price to be $900,000, but there's other items in here where you might be more likely to not say purchase price, but want to actually reference a grid line item. It would be 3A, 3D, 3E, and so forth, right? Chat over here. All right. Expiration of offer, currently that is in the back of the contract, at the end of the contract. That's been moved up here, right up here at the front. It is now 5 p.m. On the date after all buyers' signatures. That is the same as it is now, but it is moved up here to the front. All right, initial deposit amount. You're going to put this here. Had a lot of questions about this. Here's something that is important. This is a percentage is for calculation purposes only, not a contractual term. It's written here several times that it is not a contractual term. So for example, specifically on our earnest money deposit, our initial deposit, we frequently are doing a 3%, or we're writing it as 3%. That's pretty customary. But remember that actually doesn't change if the purchase price goes up. It will not change. It will stay the same because the percentage is not a contractual term. So we have that here in a couple spots. So that's just again, a reference point. It's my understanding in the new Zip Forms editor, you'll be able to put in the number. It will automatically calculate the percentage, but the percentage is not something that you would put in. So we need to write deposit to be 3% of final price in the counter. Yes, if you want it to be a contractual item, you would need to put that in the counter offer. That's correct. This is to be by wire transfer. So you recognize that right now it says electronic funds transfer. That means different things to different people. Now they have clarified that it's wire transfer, and you'll see when we dig into here a little bit later that you really are going to want it to be wire transfer, because that's what escrow has the opportunity to enforce it to be wire transfer. Although you can put other option here. Increased deposit, we don't see this too often, but if you are to use the increased deposit, you would check this box here. It's going to pull in the DID form as part of the transaction. The DID form is a new form. It replaces the receipt for increased deposit, is now delivery of increased deposit. So this is a new form that's being incorporated in this transaction, in this RPA version. Again, calculation only on the contractual, on the percentage. And you can select here when that increased deposit would be applied. Loan amount, moving forward. This is where you would put your loan amount. And then again, percentage of purchase price. And you'll see in this one, it does not have this clause about calculation purposes not being a contractual term. So if let's say you had an 80% purchase price as your loan amount, then you would, even if the purchase price increased, that percentage would remain in place. And now it has buyer to pay 0 points or up to a percentage of the loan amount. So the default is 0 points. You do now, and you do of course still have the spot here to add your rate. You have the place here to add a checkbox for FHA or VA. If you check either of those, it will automatically pull over the FBAC and the HID. Those are required on FHA and VA transactions. The FBAC is the amendatory clause, and the HID is the get a home inspection document. Right, you have a spot here for other items. Now, this one confuses some people. This 17 days after acceptance, this relates to this over here. You guys can see my hopefully you can see my cursor kind of pointing out what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we can see it, Merle.
Thank you. All right.
And Tim had a question for you, so if you want to jump over and look at his question.
Thank you. Okay. Deposit, do we always need to state the percentage? That percentage, by stating the percentage, you're just providing that extra protection for your client in the event that percentage rates jump crazy high, and before they get locked in and they suddenly decide that they don't want to buy it at that price, at that interest rate. So it's a good idea to always put in a percentage there. Oh, deposit, not rate. Do we always need to state the percentage? In here, I assume that's what you're talking about. Up here in the initial deposit amount, it's going to automatically calculate it in Zip Forms. It will automatically calculate it for you. That is the plan, is my understanding from Zip Forms. Again, haven't seen it, haven't actually seen it in action yet, but that's the plan. Okay, so back to this 17 days. This relates to when you will deliver a list of lender required repairs. This is not the loan contingency dates. All right, this only relates to when you will deliver the FHA or VA lender required repairs. And just so you know, that's going to now be part of the repair request. The FVA, which was a standalone lender required repairs document, repair request, is going away. There's now a section within the repair request that you can identify lender required repairs. But again, that's what this is. Again, not the contingency date for your loan. Okay, everybody good on that, I hope. Right, additional financing, this looks the same basically as above. So you'll know what to do with that. Very similar to what we have now. Then we drop down to section 3E3. This is occupancy type. We've always had primary or investment. We now have primary, secondary, and investment. So it may depend if this is not their primary home and they're getting a loan. You may want to discuss with the lender if it should be listed as a secondary home or an investment property, and make sure that you're checking those boxes appropriately, as they may have impact on the lending. Okay, the balance of the down payment will be automatically populated just like it is now, and then the total purchase price will automatically populate to reflect the same number as we have here. So this really shouldn't be all that different to you than what we have on our current RPA. And we've now made it through page 1. Yay. We'll keep going. The top of page 2, for those who are following along, hopefully you're all following along. We are at top of page 2, 3G1 is seller credit, if any, to buyer. So this was not previously an option in the RPA. It had to just be written into other terms. So now this is a line item. And you would check the box here and then include the number. Again, not a percentage on this one, it's just a number. And these are seller credits to be applied to closing costs. They have taken away the they don't feel it's necessary to have recurring or non-recurring. So unless you have a lender that specifically requests that, they don't feel it's necessary for that to be in there. So we just put this. Now I did have somebody ask, or I've had several people ask about credits that are negotiated after the RPA is executed. So for example, credits that are agreed to when lieu of repairs, in lieu of repairs. In that case, those would not be on this graph in this chart, or on the graph. They would be done through an amendment later. But this would be if you're going in asking for seller credits. You don't see much of that in this market, but the market will eventually turn itself around and be a little more buyer friendly. And in that point in time, you may be seeing this utilized a bit more. Okay, in lieu of additional loan terms. Not understanding that one, Tim. You can unmute. Line item on previous page. You can unmute. All right, I don't know what I don't know exactly what you're asking. In lieu of additional loan terms, just the deposit amount.
You mean additional financial terms, which is the next paragraph.
Down here. Oh, down here. Additional financial terms would be if you have some other financial terms that you want to add in. Oh, I see the top of this question. Just deposit amount. If it's 20,000, that is 2.88. Do we need to calculate this, or it's done automatically? The percentage is done automatically. This line item for additional finance terms, if there's any other terms in relation to the financing that you want to include in here, they've given you a little spot to do that. You have here your verification of all cash, verification of down payment, and verification of loan application. These have all changed to being defaulted to attached to the offer, right? Right now, the default is the 3 days, and you can check the box for attached to the offer. They have flipped that around. It is now defaulting to attached to the offer, which is what all of the listing agents want, and the best way to present, of course, your purchase agreement if you're representing a buyer. So you're going to want to attach those to the offer. If you need additional time, then you have the checkbox here for your options. The verification of loan application, you now have 3 options here: pre-qualification, pre-approval, fully underwritten pre-approval. Again, another opportunity where you're going to want to have a conversation with the lender and make sure that you have checked the box for the appropriate type of loan application verification, because each one of these is, of course, carries a little bit more strength and weight. So make sure you're checking the appropriate box for that and attach it to the offer. Okay. Section I was intentionally left blank because they thought it looked too much like a 1. And so we move on to J, which is final verification of condition. That's 5 days prior to COE. That is the same as what we have now. And an assignment request. We talked about assignments briefly a minute ago. We'll dig into that a bit more, but it is now within the first 17 days after acceptance is our default date. That can be adjusted, but this does put parameters around when somebody can request an assignment. Current RPA does allow for an assignment, but it doesn't have a time frame associated with it. So we now will have to ask within the first 17 days, or again, that time can be adjusted there in that line item. We get into section L. These are the contingencies. Remember I said on page 1 that the 17 days in the loan section was for the lender required repairs, not the loan contingency. Right here is your loan contingency. This is now 17 days. In fact, you'll see all of our contingencies are basically 17 days. So they have done that to streamline the process, and instead of trying to remember which number of days are which, but they give you these little spaces where you can adjust the time frame if you want it to be longer or shorter. But you can at least you can now just remember that they are all 17 days unless you make a change to it. So 17 days for loan, or you've got a spot here for loan contingency removal, 17 days for appraisal, or a spot here to remove appraisal contingency. You will see that these are the only 2 contingencies that you can remove within the RPA. Any other appraisal, or I'm sorry, any other contingencies that you want to remove, you need to remove them with a contingency release. But these 2 can be done within the RPA. They have a new section here under appraisal contingency based upon appraised value at a minimum of purchase price or. So the default is that it will meet purchase price. You have a checkbox here where you could reduce that. So if you say your purchase price is $900,000, but you are willing to still purchase the property as long as it appraises for at least $850 or $875, then you could put that in here. Right? We usually have some questions about that, so feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat if you have any questions about that. Just a reminder that if it is FHA or VA, removing the appraisal contingency here does not really remove the appraisal contingency, because the FVAC, which is the amendatory clause, is a standalone document that has an appraisal contingency in it that cannot be waived. So if you try to waive it here and you have an amendatory clause as part of the contract, which you would for an FHA or VA, then you will not be able to actually waive the appraisal contingency on those 2 loan types. Okay. All right, moving along, investigation of the property. This is 17 days, which is the same as we have now. Informational access to the property. This is in the contract now, but a lot of people don't see it, use it, even know about it. They are now making it more visible. And it is also 17 days. So let's say, for example, you have your home inspections, all your inspections, you waive your contingencies, you're done with your investigations, but you still want to have access to the property. Maybe you've completed all of your investigations prior to your 17 days or shortened your contingency period on that. This is informational access to the property. This is for those times where you've got the buyer wants to bring in their contractor to measure for carpet, or the mother-in-law is in town and they want to see the property. If you've moved past those 17 days and you have not extended that time frame out, then the seller does not have to give you access to the property. Right. So I know a lot of buyer's agents that like to extend this out so that it is allowed for the entire transaction. But then there's listing agents that do not want it out there that long, because of course, sometimes you have that contractor that comes in and says, oh my gosh, this kitchen's going to cost you 3 times more than you think it is. And now they're going to be looking for another way to get out of the contract, or they're less excited about their new home. So just be aware of this informational access to the property. If you're wearing your buyer hat or your seller hat, and decide what dates you think should be in there. Otherwise, the default is just the 17 days to be concurrent with investigations. The buyer has 17 days to review the documents provided by the seller. So that is all of the seller disclosures, etc., reports and such. 17 days for title, 17 days for common interest development. So this is your CC&Rs, your HOAs, and 17 days for review of leased or liened items, such as solar panels and so forth. So all of that is here within these 17 days, which is all the same timeframes that we have currently. And then you've got this box here, 3L8, for the sale of buyer's property. It is not contingent on that unless checked. You check this box, the COP comes over. That is the same as we have now. All right, moving along to possession. We've got a big change here. In section 3M1, upon notice of recordation. So when it records, that is possession. Everybody knows what it is now, right? 6 p.m. on the date of close, but it is now changed. The default is at notice of recordation. So once it's recorded, they have occupancy. If that's 10 o'clock in the morning, they get it then. If it is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they get it then. All right. What if they're, I'm sorry, Tim's got a question. I'm assuming you're talking about the review of seller's documents needs to be concurrent with, needs to jive with investigation of the property. Yes and no. You will see in a later paragraph that it says if they have released this contingency without having all of this information, it doesn't actually necessarily reopen that contingency. But theoretically, yes, you would want to have those work together. Contracts take 7 days for them to receive the documents from the seller. Seller has 7 days to provide them. When we get deeper into the paragraphs, I think this stuff will make a little bit more sense. All right, so sorry, time of possession, we are upon notice of recording, right? Or you can check the box for the 6 p.m. Or a line to add some additional time. So just be aware, and this is one of those things you're going to want to talk to. Oh, your mic isn't working. Got it. Yeah, it would be certainly easier if you could talk. Maybe on the break, you can figure that out. Upon notice of recording or 6 p.m. or a different date. So again, something to have a conversation with your seller when you receive this. If you're the listing agent, make sure that you let them know if it is going to be at notice of recording, that they would need to basically be prepared to be out by that morning, because sometimes we get recordings pretty early in the day. All right, so that's the new default. And your buyers are going to be sitting there on the doorstep waiting. Seller occupied or vacant units. So if the seller is going to remain in possession for a period of time that is after COE, we've got 2 options here. 29 days or fewer, you will have the SIP. 30 days or longer, you will have the RLAS. This is the same as we have now, but remember that you need to check that box and include it with the contract. These are required documents in the event that the seller is to remain. It provides protection and clarity for both parties So please make sure that you are including them. Tenant occupied units. This is a new one. This is something that you're really going to need to be paying attention to. If there is a tenant in the property, you need to include the tenant occupied property addendum. This is to be used, and you'll see it in a later paragraph, whether the tenant intends to remain in possession or not. So if it is tenant occupied at the time of acceptance, you must have a TOPA form. This is a new form in the contract. Even if the tenant is expected to move out next week or a week before close, it doesn't matter. You need to have the TOPA included in the contract if there's a tenant in the property at the time of acceptance. Okay, so this is when we're talking about timeframes for seller documents. So that's in here. So these are time periods. Seller to deliver their documents is 7 days after acceptance. That's the same as we have now. All parties to sign and return escrow holders provisions within 5 days after receipt. So that is also the same as we have now. Time to pay fees is 3 days. Again, same as now. Here's a new one. I think we'll all like this. Install smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detector, and the water heater bracing within 7 days after acceptance. If you're going to have a quick escrow or you think that you're going to have an appraiser out there earlier, you might want to shorten that time frame down. But this is now a time frame item, which was not in there before. Evidence of representative authority, 3 days after acceptance. Right, representative authority is the same thing as our representative capacity. Representative capacity signature disclosure is a document that we use now. It will still be available, but less use because that is actually being incorporated into the end of the purchase agreement. So you'll see that later this afternoon in the training. But the evidence of authority to be delivered within 3 days of acceptance, that is the same as we have now. But they've now put it on the grid because it's one of those things that was kind of buried in a paragraph and a lot of people didn't do it. So they're now making it more front and center, as it should be, because we shouldn't take an entity signature without knowing that that person has the signature authority. All right, are we all good on page 2? Can move on to page 3. Excellent. Gosh, you guys are quiet. We'll get through this faster. And when we do them in person, we tend to get a little more questions. It's perfectly fine to unmute yourself and ask a question. All right, page 3. Over here. This one is going to be an interesting new twist on our purchase agreement, and that is items included. So here's pop quiz. What do we have as included and excluded, or I'm sorry, what are the 3 things we have as included now? Hopefully everybody remembers. It's refrigerator, stove, and washer and dryer. You see now we have a much longer list. It's stove, refrigerator, wine refrigerator. That's really important, of course. Washer and dryer are separate line items. Dishwasher, microwave. You've got the video doorbell, security cameras, security alarms, smart home control devices, wall-mounted brackets. Okay, this is mostly all dealing with the all these new smart home stuff. Of course, wall-mounted brackets were always part of the contract, current contract. Above ground pool or spa, bathroom mirrors, and bathroom mirrors being the only one that's checked. So I guess that's super important, is that we have our bathroom mirrors. Electric car charging system, right? How many people see those Tesla packs on the in the garage? So that's important that we know whether those are included or not. And then potted trees and shrubs. You've got a few line spaces here to add additional things. Here's the thing, you guys, I totally expect to see lazy agents out there that just check all the boxes because they just want to check all the boxes. Maybe they don't know what's there. Maybe it's an agent that hasn't even been in the property, or they're just being lazy in general. Don't be a lazy agent. Please make sure that you just check what you know that is there and you want to convey with the property. There is in this paragraph that we'll get to later, it does specify that they are items that are actually, there at the property at the time of acceptance. But still, it's best to only check what you are expecting to come over. You would hate to have checked a box for the wine refrigerator. Buyer is expecting wine refrigerator. Seller didn't think to counter it out, and there actually isn't a wine refrigerator. And now everyone's discussing, looking back at pictures, was there a wine refrigerator somewhere? So just be mindful of this. And when you're filling it out, and then if you're the listing agent, make sure you talk to your sellers about all of these items, particularly these. And there's more details on these in the paragraph. But all of this security equipment and such, whether they want that to stay or go, that needs to be a discussion with your sellers. All right, so question. Stove, fridge, and washer are not standard to stay. Technically, the kitchen appliances that are attached are supposed to stay, but I would just, it's always best. Fridge would only be something that would technically stay if it was a built-in refrigerator, maybe a Sub-Zero. So refrigerators are always negotiable unless they are built in, but fridge, washer, dryer, stove, any of those things, you're going to want to check the box if you want them to stay.
Marilee, this is Eric.
Yeah.
Hey, so in the current contract, it says all refrigerators. So if I check the refrigerator box, am I saying the one in the garage and the one in the house?
Yes. This would be refrigerators. So that is to imply all. Honestly, I would clarify. I think it's always a good idea to clarify on things like that. Or if you don't want it, right? Because we only have a couple spaces here for things. So maybe they want the one in the kitchen, but they don't want the one in the garage. You could click refrigerator here and then say excluded is the refrigerator in the garage. But
Gotcha.
I would say the more clarity, the better.
And then does paragraph 9 talk about like wall cover, window coverings and things like that? Or do we have to
and we're going to get to that. Yeah. Oh yeah, it digs way into a bunch of other stuff. But these are the ones that it brings forward just in the graph. MLS. So this is a good question because I do have a note to review that. MLS is not contractual. All right. So if it says it's included or excluded in the MLS, please add that information into the contract. It's really important to recognize that the MLS, any marketing materials, any list of upgrades that's provided to the property, those are not contractual. So you would want to make sure that if you're expecting something to stay or go, it is referenced in here. Nope, MLS is contractual between the brokerages. It is not, as far as like items that are included or excluded, that is absolutely not contractual. And it does state that in here in the paragraph as well. But MLS is not contractual as far as items that are included and excluded. All right. I do like to tell a story though. Be careful if you're representing the seller that you pay attention to this and you talk through it. It's nice actually that again, it's not hidden in a paragraph anymore. It's front and center in the graph. I represented a buyer once, checked the box for the refrigerator on our existing RPA. We went into counter offers on some other things. They never counted out the refrigerator. And about a week into escrow, the listing agent called me and said, oh yeah, I saw that box was checked. By the way, refrigerator's not included. I'm like, yeah, it is. So she missed it because she said, oh, I was countering. I was looking at the contract on my phone when I wrote the counter. Okay, well, not my problem really. It was one of those refrigerators, not a built-in, but a really nice refrigerator that had the glass fronts so you could see in. And my buyers just loved that refrigerator and they were insistent that they wanted that refrigerator. And so the sellers also didn't want to leave their refrigerator, but then they were contractually obligated to do so. So the listing agent ended up buying a $6,000 refrigerator for the seller to replace it in their new home. So I tell you that story as a reminder, because you don't want to be the listing agent buying a new refrigerator for somebody or a bunch of new video equipment. So pay attention to this section and have a conversation with your seller. Make sure they understand all the things that will be included or excluded, and that they are responsible for doing that. Other items like water softener and air purifier. So yes, water softeners and air purifier, not those like plug into the wall air purifiers, small ones that are like room size, but water softeners, yes. And we'll talk about that in paragraph 9. All right, so you'll see there's just a couple spaces for excluded items that you can add anything that you want removed. So for example, if you want I don't know, if you want the above ground spa to be ensured that it's being removed or something along those lines, the garage refrigerator that you don't want because it's not energy efficient or something along those lines, you can have your exclusions in here. If you know from the MLS that the dining room chandelier belonged to the grandmother and that's going to be excluded, you can go ahead and put it in there. So you save having to deal with that in counter offers. All right, any other questions? And again, we'll get into a whole bunch more when we hit paragraph 9.
Yeah, there was one about solar panels.
Solar, yes, solar is identified later in the contract. But it does convey. Okay, allocation of costs. So here we are, natural hazard report. This is the same as we have now. In these items, at the top here under allocation of costs, where it says who pays, right? In each of these, you have the option for buyer, seller, or both. If you check both, it's going to be equally split unless otherwise agreed. Do you see this has capital letters O and A, otherwise agreed? That means it is otherwise agreed as defined in the glossary. And otherwise agreed in the glossary is going to tell you it has to be in writing and agreed to by both parties. So anyway, if you say both on any of these, with the exception of escrow, which has another option down here, they will be split equally. So natural hazard disclosure report, buyer, seller. You've got your box here for environmental, and then who the provider is. So if you want to say, what do we have? Disclosure source, First American, property ID, any of that should fit in there. By the way, in the graph, they don't give you a ton of space in these lines to add things, but if you need to go over, then it will automatically pull in the overflow text addendum. We do have overflow text addendum now. Not seeing it used a ton, but with this graph and sort of the smaller spaces that they have for you to place information, we may start to see the overflow text addendum a bit more, but I think you can fit most of our items in here. Now back to section 9. If paragraph 9 states included and is not checked, then it's still included, and the responsibility falls actually on the seller to counter out rather than the buyer to include. Yes, that's generally true. So you'll see that when we get to paragraph 9. All right, other reports. So if you have other reports that you're asking for, that you want, maybe you want the seller to pay for, perhaps a termite report. I don't see that too often anymore, but or sewer inspection report or something along those lines, you can put those in here and who's going to pay for it. I generally would suggest that the buyer has the opportunity to do any of their inspections that they want to do. So if it's the buyer's planning to do it, you don't necessarily need to put it in here because that always seems to open Pandora's box with the lender. Septic report, absolutely. If you want the seller to complete it, you could include that in here, but you would also want to include the septic well and monument document, which you'll have an opportunity to attach later. The smoke alarms, carbon monoxide and water heater. We talked about that. Remember, the default is that it's going to be done in 7 days. That doesn't say who's going to do it and pay for it. So here is who's going to pay for that work to be done. Okay, buyer or seller. This is government required point of sale inspections and reports. This is the inspections and reports only. Who's going to pay for those? And then this is the corrective action and who's going to pay for those. So these are actually already in our existing RPA, but they've now added it to the graph. And if well monument is in conflict not listed on Q1, then again falls on the seller. Yeah, the thing is in any of this, if it's not clear or not clearly defined, or there's conflict, then I would put it in, clarify in the counteroffer. And this is going, honestly, there's a lot that this listing agent is going to need to review and discuss and be prepared for counteroffer with this new RPA. Escrow fees, buyer, seller, both, or each their own. We've been typing in each their own for a long time. So now you have a spot just to check that box. Owner's title insurance, buyer, seller, or both. And you've got the lines here. Should be plenty of space to add Inner Valley and Orange Coast. But again, if you have something that goes over, that text box or the overflow addendum would kick in.
Marilee,
So we seller cannot
Q5 and Q6, Marilee, what if they're not applicable?
You can leave it blank. You can leave it blank. Or you could write NA in this line. That would be your other option. They don't give you this spot for NA really in this contract, except for in this lines here.
You don't know if if you use the NA button on a contract, does it fill it in there if you left it blank?
If what? The NA button?
On the current zip forms, there's a spot where you can click NA up at the top, and it will just fill in NA to anything you left blank. So
I don't know that it's going to do that. Again, I haven't seen the new editor.
I figured you didn't know, so sorry.
It might, but it doesn't really give you a good spot to do that, but possibly. So as a seller, we cannot rely on the grid. Yes, you can rely on the grid. Just wait till we get through these paragraphs for the additional details and see if that helps you feel better about it, Tim. You can rely on the grid because the grid is referencing in relation to the specific details of the paragraphs. So hopefully that helps a little bit. I think it'll make sense once we dig into it a little bit more. All right, so we're escrow fee, owner's title policy, buyer's title policy, unless otherwise identified, the buyer policy will be the same company as the seller policy. County transfer tax, city transfer tax, those are on here. Again, I believe you could write NA here if you need to. HOA fee is going to be for preparing is defaulted to seller. Certification fee defaulted to buyer. Transfer fee is negotiable, right? So you would have to identify that here. Private transfer fee, again, if applicable, is going to default to the seller, or you can select buyer or both. Important, especially if you're a listing agent, to know if there's a private transfer fee, because if there is, and the buyer doesn't check anything, thinking that not knowing if it's there or not, the default is to the seller. You've got a couple spots here for other costs or fees that you may wish to include. And then down at the bottom, home warranty plan, buyer, seller, both. Again, both would be split 50-50. You have a checkbox for buyer to waive it. Now we have cost not to exceed and who it's issued by. You'll notice we do not have is the upgrade, AC, pool, all of this stuff. They've actually changed it so that this is now an allowance. Buyer can spend on any coverage that they want up to the amount that's listed. And of course, they can always spend more if they want to pay for it, but we no longer have the parameter of saying that the seller only has to purchase what was, the specific coverage that was identified. We've all been writing in buyer to select coverage, right? So now we don't have to worry about that. We can just have, we have cost not to exceed, put in the number, and it becomes a allowance. You'll see the details of that in the paragraph, right? We've got a space here for additional terms. And with that, we are through with the graph and we start digging into more detail. We good with the graph? Any other questions about the graph? All right, we can get through a little bit more before we take a quick break. All right, property addenda and advisory. Do want to note that the standalone probate and manufactured home purchase agreements are being removed. So you will no longer have a standalone RPA for a probate transaction or a manufactured home transaction. You will now use this purchase agreement and add either the probate or manufactured home addendum that is associated with what you're doing. So don't, if you do a lot of manufactured homes, or if you do probates, don't go looking for those RPAs. They are gone. The tenant occupied property addendum, we talked about that. Again, should be checked whether current tenants will remain or not. So make sure that you are aware of that and have it included. We don't see too much of this tenant in common or stock cooperative, but you've got those two as well. So these are your property type addenda. Again, property type, not other. So if you had something else, I'm not sure what else we might throw in there, maybe REO or something, but these are all addenda that you would include based on the type of the property. Then we've got other addenda.
So no short sale addenda in there.
Right, you would have, that would be other, and it's in here. Short sale is kind of I guess it's not a property type. Now, tenant occupied property is not really a type either, as it relates to like these, but I don't really know how they came up with the split on these two.
Yeah, no, actually, I see it's in paragraph C.
But it is, yeah, down here. So you've got short sale, and you've got your probate advisory here. So your other addenda, including short sale, court confirmation. So this would be, for example, like if it was a divorce or bankruptcy, when you have a court confirmation. Seller intent to exchange and buyer intent to exchange. These are actually just renamed and revised, but these would be what you would use in the event that one or the other party is completing a 1031 exchange. We've got the, of course, just a regular checkbox for your regular addendum. Backup offer addendum can be checked here. Septic well and property monument, we just spoke about that. That is here as well. This is where you would also put in your DILBAC addenda. So that's any other addenda that you want to include would go in here. Right. Buyer and seller advisories. So of course, addenda and advisories are different. These are included for reference and are not intended to be incorporated in this agreement. So for example, the statewide buyer and seller is not going to have, if you check that, which of course we want checked on all of our transactions, would not automatically pull it into the contract, but it will be included, by both parties agreeing to include it. This is being updated, the SBSA. It is now 63 topic paragraphs and an introduction page. So that's awesome. And everyone's definitely going to read that whole entire thing before signing it. But just note that that has been updated as well. The other one I wanted to put, so you'll notice these are all very familiar: short sale, probate, buyer's inspection advisory, wire fraud, fair housing, and the CCPA. Those are all part of the contract now. They will continue to be part of the contract. The one that I think will cause some people some confusion is this wildfire disaster advisory. This is not the same as the FHDS. The FHDS is a statutory disclosure, and it does get addressed later in the contract, but the wildfire advisory is an optional informational advisory. It does not meet the, it is not what satisfies the requirements of the FHDS. So you may have cooperating agents that check that box and think that they are meeting that fire hardening and defensible space disclosure by including the wildfire disaster advisory, and that is not the case. So hopefully that makes sense to all of you guys. Okay, what happens if a backup addendum is checked and included? Seller would have to counter this out if unwilling to accept as backup as part of a multiple offer. Correct. So if it was a multiple offer and they just automatically included the backup offer addendum and you did not want it to be in backup offer position, you would have to counter that out. That is correct. Okay, additional terms. Buyer represents funds will be good when deposited in escrow. All right, remember when we talked about the initial deposit and that it's now states wire transfer instead of electronic transfer? We do have that little space where you could write in something different, but we've now given escrow the opportunity. So if escrow doesn't want to accept your alternate method of deposit, then upon notice from escrow, it has to be wire transfer. So I have seen where people check the box and write in personal check or cashier's check. If escrow says, nope, I'm not taking it, then it has to be wire transfer. So the best thing here is to, because I am assuming that many escrow companies will exercise this right now that they have it, that you should just prepare your buyers to utilize wire transfer. I think that's the wise thing to do. Increased deposit is the same thing. It will be in the same method. So again, if they have to use wire transfer for the initial deposit, they would need to do that for the increased deposit. And with the increased deposit, you're going to incorporate the DID form. Again, not seen very often, but be aware. Retention of deposit. This is really important. There's a reason why it's bold. So this is actually the case now, but we don't, maybe it's not as brought forward as much. But if you were to utilize any language that talks about non-refundable deposit and the liquidated damages clause is signed by both parties, then any additional language regarding retention of deposit, so like saying deposit to be non-refundable after the first 10 days or anything like that, if you've got the liquidated damages clause signed, then unless the language that you wrote satisfies the statutory liquidated damages requirements set forth in the civil code, then that language is going to be unenforceable. And so you may have some very unhappy clients. So I would highly recommend that you, if you have a seller that says, well, I want their deposit to be non-refundable, you need to point out this paragraph, let them know they are welcome to contact an attorney to write that language that satisfies the civil code, because we are not attorneys and we are not going to write that language that would satisfy the civil code. If they want that language included, they would need to have it written. Otherwise, it's going to be, most likely, it will be unenforceable and invalid. And then they're going to be really unhappy with you when they can't keep that deposit. So please be aware of this. There's a reason, again, that it's bold. And don't, before anybody asks me to have Mona write it, she won't do it. All right. So anything like that, she wants the sellers to find their own attorney to write any additional language like that. All right. So just be aware, and you can point it out in the event that they want to keep a deposit. And that is not just in relation to at the front end of the RPA, but later in the contract. That's where you're more likely to see it. Liquidated damages is already signed by both parties. Now something has gone sideways in the transaction and you want to negotiate something that includes a non-refundable deposit, it's very likely that it would not be an enforceable clause. Okay, so just be aware. All right. If it is all cash, of course, it is not contingent on the loan. Otherwise, it will be. All right. The loan will be conventional financing unless otherwise checked. Right. Same thing with the additional financed amount. Here's a new section. So this is 4C3, buyer's loan status. This is new language. Buyer authorizes seller and seller's authorized agent to contact buyer's lender to determine the status of any buyer's loan specified. So not only now can the seller's agent call the buyer's lender for status. The seller themselves has authorization to call the buyer's lender. Okay, so be aware of that. Also, if the buyer wants to pursue alternate financing or change the lender or the contact information of the lender, then they need to deliver updated contact information within 1 day of seller's request. Okay, so anything that's changed than what was provided at the time of the agreement, that needs to be given updated information with 1 day. Again, the seller has to know to request it, but they do have to provide it if requested. Right? If FHA or VA is checked, the amendatory clause will be incorporated and signed by all parties. Right there. Doesn't say it's optional. There's no checkbox to include it or not. It will be included. Okay. And in the time frame specified, which is defaulting to 17 days, they'll deliver written notice via the RR or an AA. Right, so this is the require request. We'll now have language in there for lender required repairs. So for any lender required corrective action, right? Seller's agreement, seller has no obligation to pay or satisfy these lender requirements unless agreed to in writing. Sometimes I see sellers who think they don't want to take a VA loan because they think they're going to be forced to make those repairs. They are not forced to pay for these repairs, and it's going to have to be negotiable just like any other repair request. However, of course, the repairs will have to get done for the loan to go through. Financing on all cash offer, reserving the right to obtain. You will see, Tim, we will see that in just a minute. That's in the next page. Balance of purchase price, of course, will be deposited per escrow holder's instructions. Limit on credit to buyers. This is the same, but they have clarified it a little bit more. So if you have negotiated a credit, and of course, that has to be disclosed to the buyer's lender. So let's say you have negotiated a $10,000 credit in lieu of repairs. The information, of course, goes to the lender. The lender's allowable credits is $8,000, right? Then it will automatically, escrow will automatically reduce that to match the lender's allowable credit. That extra $2,000 in my example doesn't automatically get added or subtracted anywhere else. You would either have to negotiate that as a separate item or just accept the $8,000 that was a lender allowable credit. But this basically is saying that escrow will reduce it to the amount of lender allowable credits. It cannot exceed the lender allowable credits. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, same as what we have now, just clarified a bit more. Okay, verification down payment and verification of loan. The same language we have now will be done in the timeframes as specified in the grid. All right, Tim, here we are. Buyer stated financing. This is everybody's least favorite paragraph. So seller is relying on buyer's representation of the type of financing specified, right? Sellers agreed to specific closing date and purchase price and is relying on buyer's specified financing. Buyer shall pursue the financing specified, even if buyer also elects to pursue an alternative form of financing. Okay, so they can pursue an alternative form of financing. Seller has no obligation to cooperate with buyer's efforts to obtain this, but shall not interfere with closing at the purchase price, the purchase price of the COE date, even if based on alternative financing. Okay, so the seller really only cares that the property closes on time for the amount of money that was agreed upon. How that money gets there really isn't the seller's concern per se. They have agreed to this contract based on the information provided by the buyer, but it does not preclude the buyer from pursuing other options. The seller does not have to cooperate, but they cannot interfere. Okay, how you define interference, I didn't write this. I'm not an attorney. I cannot define interference, but they don't have to cooperate. But they cannot interfere. Buyer is still obligated to purchase the property and close escrow as specified. So the best thing that you can do is to is to make sure that you fully vetted the buyer and their money, their proof of funds on the front end of this, and you're going to hold them tight on all of the timeframes. Right, that's the best thing that you can do to keep them moving forward in hopes that they will close on time, the amount agreed upon, even if that means they wrote it for cash and ended up getting a loan. So hopefully that makes sense. I have had people ask if they can have language to put into a counteroffer that negates this clause. Mona will not write that. She said the seller is welcome to contact an attorney to write that. But again, just remember, and this is what conversation you want to have with your sellers, what they want is for it to close on time at a certain price, right? The buyer is still obligated to do it. So if they wrote it for cash and now they're getting a loan, but they still have the cash, right? They still have to comply with what they have agreed upon. And what you're really concerned about is that it closes on time. And I would say we saw a lot of that this year, and 90% of the time they closed just fine. So just have that conversation with the seller. If they get upset about it, there is this clause that is allowing it. G2, so language must be included that seller allow access to appraiser. So this is the question is cooperating and not interfering. Is an appraiser coming into the property considered something that they would have to do for cooperating and not interfering? I personally don't think so. I think you could say there was no appraisal contingency here. We're not allowing appraiser in the property, but I am not an attorney. So that would be something that you would have to have further, I think will remain to be seen how that plays out. And it may just depend on how you feel about if the property would appraise or not. But they've waived their appraisal contingency. If they've written it for all cash, assuming that's the scenario, then even if it doesn't appraise, they're still obligated. They can't get the loan without the appraisal. That is true, or likely true. The appraiser would have to have access, likely true, though we do see a lot of drive-bys still, depending on the situation. But they can't go out on that. They would still have to proceed with the transaction. They can't get out of it on appraisal contingency in that scenario. Can't get a loan without the appraisal. So you would have to add, you would basically say it's all cash. If you were writing it that way, all cash, but continue to have the appraisal contingency in place. That is how you would have to do it. Add a language to allow the appraisal contingency to remain, which we see even now. Sometimes people with cash still want an appraisal contingency. Access to the property. Yes. So they have their 17 days to access the property. And having an appraiser come in would be something that you could say is part of their investigations. So that would be allowed within that access, if not shortened. Yes. Okay. So with that, I am going to suggest we take a break. We are again at the top of page 5, section 7. We will resume there. It is 10:50, so we will be back here. You guys are doing great. Hopefully you're all still awake. And we will come back here at 11 o'clock on the dot. and get back to it so we can get you guys out of here by or before 1 o'clock. All right. All right. 10-minute break.
Hey, Marilee, can you hear me now?
I can.
Ah.
Hi, welcome
Hi.
back.
Thank you. A little jet lagged, but I'm okay.
I bet. Right. I'm impressed that you're like hanging in here with questions.
Yes, well, I haven't been to this and it starts in a couple of days.
Tomorrow.
But so my question though, coming back to this real quickly about this access, right? So when we write an offer that's a cash offer, and I just did this where the buyer also wanted the right, reserve the right to obtain financing.
Mhm.
The seller is not obligated to allow access to an appraiser per
Well,
the terms written if it's an
but
all cash offer.
Right, but they are allowed to have, do their investigations.
Well, right, but you can't get an appraiser in a 7-day investigation contingency.
Wait, you should have 17 days, or did you shorten the
No, but
time?
Well, I'm saying if you write an offer in today's market, you're writing 7 to 10 day access contingency, investigation contingency, which now as a seller's representative, we would counter access to the same period of time unless we were willing to allow the buyers additional access. But that's not necessarily access for their appraiser. You would specifically, and we do currently write, I did anyway, that buyer or seller agrees to allow buyer's appraisal access. Buyer reserves the right to obtain financing in an all cash offer, and seller agrees to cooperate by giving access to the buyer's appraiser. If you don't have that language in this contract specifically, then the seller can interfere with them, their ability to get an alternative financing.
Right. So, but you do have that informational purposes. That
Well, again, if you're a selling agent, listing agent, sorry, you're going to counter those to be consistent with one another.
yeah.
Right? I'm not going to necessarily say, hey, you can't have access to go measure, but we're not contractually obligated to allow anyone into the property after such and such a time. So you'd have to do it. So then my question would be, does that go on the grid G2? And does the grid supersede the contract? Because we've already said that if you don't check the grid, the paragraph supersedes. So does the grid supersede the paragraph, or does the paragraph supersede the grid?
Well, the paragraph does not have any place to add additional terms. So
Correct.
You can't type anything into the paragraph. So if you've typed something into the grid that's different than the paragraph, then the grid would be the prevailing item because you have added it in there and they've agreed to it.
So that would be like, for example, in G2, the bottom of G2, where it says
Additional financing terms.
Yeah, right. Additional financing terms. I lost it. But yeah, that's where that would go, correct?
You could put that in there. Yeah.
And so that would be our prevailing additional financing terms. So there is no financing, it's a cash transaction. A buyer reserves the right to obtain financing. Seller agrees to cooperate with buyer's appraisal access or something. But you have to put it there under G2.
Right.
And then that would prevail with regard to interference or whatever the language was there under
It's
financing. Where's that at?
it's 5C. 6C. Sorry, 6C.
6. I'm missing page 5. Hold on. I lost page 5, but okay, yeah, that sounds right. 6, there it is. Right, buyer stated financing. Okay. Okay, so that's where we would use the grid to be a prevailing amendment, G2 for additional terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could put that in there.
And then like right. And then in terms of like the same thing is true, we saw something about included items. where if they didn't check it in the grid, then the paragraph that says it's included prevails,
Yes,
and that's where the seller can't rely on the grid. They have to actually read the paragraph to see what's included in
Yes.
items considered fixtures
yes,
under included items.
yes. I'm personally
This
concerned
is-
that section of the grid is going to cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, because I can speak from personal experience. I've bought 2 refrigerators for buyers.
Yep,
Well, one's for buyer, one's for seller, where one in particular with the seller, I guess relevant to this conversation, where the selling agent wrote in additional terms, refrigerator to be included, but did not check the box. So when we looked at the contract, missed the additional term item for the refrigerator being included, referred to what was effectively the previous grid, in this case would be the grid. You can't rely on that. You have to go scour the entire thing to see. It used to be you'd have to scour it before. Now you don't have to, because if it's not listed as an included feature, it's not included unless it's checked in the grid.
right.
Conversely, if it's not checked in the grid but is listed as a fixture, you're on the hook for it.
Right.
You-
It's having
Yeesh.
the grid versus the paragraph on on section 9, right? The inclusions, I think is
Yep.
going to cause a lot of grief.
That's going to cause a lot of problems. Right.
Yep.
I agree. Yeah. Okay.
Tim,
Yes, ma'am.
hey, it's Carrie.
Hi, Carrie.
Back to G2 under additional finance terms. What language are you going to put in there if it's all cash?
Same as I'd use now. Buyer reserves the right to obtain financing and seller agrees to cooperate with appraiser access.
I'm going to step away for 1 second, so I'll be back.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and seller say that last part, and seller what? I'm writing this.
And seller agrees to cooperate with appraiser access.
Cooperate. Okay, perfect.
Right, it is 11 o'clock. We're coming back. You guys back? Somebody throw some thumbs up. Hi, Diana. All right, before we jump back in, how are you guys doing? Is working for you okay on Zoom? I'll be honest, I prefer to teach this class in person, but because it's a lot to absorb and I think it's easier to be interactive in person, but it's gonna kick off tomorrow. So I wanna make sure you guys all had a chance to get a good overview. All right, you guys are good? We're ready to move on. Are you ready to talk about closing, possession, contingencies? I'll be honest, this second section, so we do 2 breaks. So we're now into the second section. This is kind of the meatiest of all of it. So hopefully you all got some extra coffee while you had your break. Let's go ahead and jump back in unless there's any questions or comments before we get going. All good. All right. All right, back at it. Oops. We are on page 5, section 7. All right, closing and possession. Remember, buyer intends to occupy the property as indicated in the grid. Occupancy can impact financing. So we talked about that when we talked about the grid. Unless otherwise agreed, property shall be delivered as is in present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. Right, so property including pool, spa, landscaping to be maintained in substantially the same condition as acceptance. This is the same as it is now. It's a good reminder. Make sure your sellers know they can't get off and be cheap and quit paying the pool guy or the landscape or whatever, quit mowing the yard. They have to keep it in substantially the same condition as acceptance. All debris and personal property not included shall be removed by close of escrow. Right, that's the same too, but now, or at the time of possession, if items are not removed when possession is delivered, all items shall be deemed abandoned. right? So they can't say that's mine and come back and get it. Buyer, after first delivering seller a written notice to remove the items, within 3 days shall have items removed or disposed of, may bring legal action as per this agreement to receive reasonable costs from seller. Now, this of course would be like a small claims item after the fact, but it does give them that option if the seller left a huge mess and it costs them money to get it all out. This written notice here, just so you know, is a new letter. You know, CAR has the sample letter library that you can access in zip forms. And there's a new letter going in there that will be the appropriate letter to use for written notice. You can provide that to the seller to use as a sample letter. Again, seller is buyer, I'm sorry, you can give it to the buyer to use as a sample letter. They are to deliver that to the seller. This would be, of course, after close of escrow, but that is in there. And as a reminder, if you've got a seller that's not going to be cooperative about cleaning up, that you can show them this paragraph that they can bring legal action. Right? Buyer is strongly advised to conduct investigations of the property. Seller and agent may not be aware of all defects. Property improvements may not be built to code, and so forth. So this nice bold buyer beware sort of paragraph puts the onus back on the buyer to do all of their investigation. There's a couple places in here that does that. They're really putting the pressure on the buyer to do all of their research. Okay, seller to remain, if the seller is to remain in possession after close of escrow, then they are advised to consult with their insurance or legal advisors for information about liability. We do see that occasionally happen where something happens to the property when the seller is still in there. And their ongoing rights and responsibilities of both. And all of that is also going to be identified in your SIP or your RLAS. So please include those. If you know you're going to have sellers in possession, even if it's just for a day or two, you cannot just put in a counteroffer occupancy to be COE +2 and move right along, right? You actually have to include, check the box, include the SIP. There's tremendous amount of liability coverage on your part by including the appropriate documents. At close of escrow, the seller will assign to buyer any assignable rights for items included in the sale, and they will give copies of these to the buyer, right? This one's important, not particularly new, but further clarified and further expanded. Seller shall close of escrow, even if seller remains in possession, provide keys, passwords, codes, and means to operate all locks, mailboxes, security systems, alarms, home automation, internet connected devices, and all that are included in the purchase price, including garage door openers, anything included in paragraph 3P and paragraph 9. All right, and if property is included in a condominium, they shall be responsible for securing any such items from the HOA, such as, pool keys and so forth. Buyer may be required to pay a deposit to the HOA for those things. This is important. This is saying, even if the seller is remaining in possession, they are going to give the buyer keys, passwords, passcodes to the alarm system, mailbox, garage door opener. All of this goes at the time of closing, unless otherwise agreed. See, again, capital letters, otherwise agreed. That means agreed to in writing by both parties. So you can't just have a conversation and we're all okay about it, right? It needs to be in writing. If you have a seller that's remaining in possession, I suspect they are not too excited about providing the keys and the passwords to all of their stuff. So you probably want to have an arrangement written and agreed to by both parties in regards to that. even if they are not, then if they're not staying, the seller's not staying, they're going to go ahead and turn everything over at the time of closing. They need to be prepared to turn all of this over. What we normally see is people turning over the keys, maybe they're in the garage door opener, and think they're all good, right? But the world has changed and we have a tremendous amount of automation in a home. And so if there is home automation, you need to have a conversation with the seller about preparing to turn over all of that information. They likely want to change the passcodes maybe a day or two before, and be prepared to turn that over to the buyer, because they don't want to be trying to figure all that out the day, the day of closing. They're there with the moving truck, and all of a sudden the buyer's agent shows up and is like, we're closed. Where's the passcodes for everything? Right. So you need to have a conversation. If you are a listing agent, you need to have a conversation with the seller about how they can process this, the process that's going to be involved with turning this over. This is now part of your responsibility. Providing service to your buyer and seller is facilitating that. All right. And it is a dialogue that you will need to have. Okay. Contingencies. This agreement is contingent on buyer obtaining a loan. That's the default unless otherwise specified. If there is no appraisal contingency or it has been waived, then failure for the property to appraise at the purchase price does not entitle buyer to exercise cancellation rights based on the loan contingency. If buyer is otherwise qualified for the loan and can satisfy the lender's non-appraisal conditions for the close of the loan. All right, I like to share on this one because I always want to really make it super clear that appraisal contingency and loan contingency are two different things. They do have a relationship, but they are two different things. So the appraisal contingency is the property's ability to obtain financing, and the loan contingency is the buyer's ability to obtain financing. Right? So those are two separate things, and you cannot just get out of one for the other. You can't say, well, it didn't appraise, so I'll go out on loan. I heard that a lot in this past year where people were waiving appraisal contingencies right and left. And they're like, well, I'll waive the appraisal contingency, but that's okay because if it doesn't appraise, I'll go out on loan. Doesn't work that way. And it doesn't work that way in our current RPA, but they made it super clear in this one. Now, where again, they have that relationship is that if the buyer doesn't have the funds or it changes their loan to debt ratio, or for some reason, because of the appraisal, maybe they would now have to, maybe they were going to use cash to pay off a debt. And now they're going to have to use that cash to buy down the appraisal. And now their debt to ratios change. There may be a scenario where they would say, well, it doesn't appraise. And because of that, they cannot qualify for the loan. Then again, it would be a relationship, but then you would be able to go out on loan, but only if you've got documentation from the lender saying that they do not qualify, right? So be very aware that you can't just willy-nilly waive appraisal thinking you're going to get out on loan, right? Is that super clear to everybody? Understand the difference? Okay, good. Few other things in regards to that, right? Buyer is advised to investigate the insurability of the property as early as possible, as it may be a requirement for lending. Pretty much always a requirement for lending. Buyer's ability to obtain insurance for the property, including fire insurance, is part of the buyer's investigation of the property. Failure to obtain insurance will justify cancellation based on investigation of contingency, but not the loan contingency. Okay, they cannot go out on loan when the only thing is they can't get insurance. We had a transaction earlier. Earlier this year, the annual premium for the fire insurance was $90,000. Right. Fortunately, they hadn't waived their inspection contingencies yet, but you cannot go out on on loan, if you, just because you can't get insurance, that is considered part of investigation contingency. Okay, buyer's contractual obligations required regarding deposit and down payment, closing costs are also not contingencies. There is no appraisal contingency. If there is no appraisal contingency, removing the loan contingency shall not be deemed removal of appraisal contingency. Again, two separate things. Okay, two separate things. If no loan contingency is checked, obtaining any loan specified is not a contingency of this agreement. If the buyer does not obtain the loan specified and is unable to purchase the property, seller may be entitled to buyer's deposit or other legal remedies. If they do no loan contingency, but they do indeed need a loan. All right, so if somebody's checked no loan contingency, you better be darn sure those buyers can close without having the loan, right? Remember, we had the on the loan pre-approval type, we've got the checkbox now for fully underwritten pre-approval. A lot of lenders will tell you fully underwritten pre-approval, you can go in with no loan contingency. You better make sure with the buyers, with the lender, that they can perform on this, because if you're going to release the loan contingency and they aren't able to get the loan, the seller may be entitled to remedies. Okay. Appraisal, again, unless otherwise specified, it is contingent on a written appraisal of the property by a licensed appraiser at the amount specified without requiring repairs or improvements. Appraisals are a reliable source of square footage. However, ability to cancel based on measurements falls within the investigation of the property contingency. So let's say you think you're buying a 5,000 square foot house. The appraiser comes in and it's only a 4,000 square foot house, but they've already waived their inspections and investigation. You cannot cancel based on the square footage deficit because it came off of the appraisal. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So again, all of the appraisal contingency is solely limited to the value determined by the appraisal. Okay, only that. That is the only reason that you can go out on appraisal contingency, is based on value, not anything else that comes out of the appraisal. For any cancellation based on appraisal contingency, buyer should deliver a copy of the appraisal to the seller upon request by the seller. Okay, hopefully you guys are clear on that. If no appraisal contingency is checked, buyer may not use the loan contingency to cancel this agreement. We already talked about that. If buyer is unable to obtain the loan solely because of the appraisal, then they may be entitled to the buyer's deposit or other legal remedies. So just be really careful with these contingencies. They're there for a reason, to provide protection. Please don't waive them without thought, without conversation with the parties involved. Okay. Investigation of the property and review of the seller documents. Those timeframes are the same as we have now. All right, section, what are we on? 7E, title. Right. They have the right to their title report and the time to review it. That is the 17 days. Okay, if you get a revised report, 5 days after receipt of a revised preliminary report that they can review. Okay, if it has, so let's say they have now removed their investigation contingency, but a new preliminary title report comes out. They have 5 days to accept that or remove that it's considered accepted, but they would have to reveal material or substantial deviation from a previously provided preliminary report if they were going to try and go out on that. They wanted to cancel based on the new prelim, it would have to have substantial deviation. What is substantial deviation? I don't know, but right. But it would have to have substantial deviation. I do want to encourage you to recognize that title is important. please read the title report when it comes through. I do like to tell the story of being in contract. We were in escrow on a property, huge backyard, beautiful home, huge backyard. And buyers were excited. They were going to put a pool and a guest house and all this stuff in the backyard. And the pre-land came out and it had some funny language about on the easement. So we ordered a plotted easement map. If you don't know what that is, talk to your title rep and understand and order those because it shows the map that shows where the easements are. And plotted easement map came in and it had a high pressure gas line that ran at a diagonal across the backyard. That house was never going to have a pool put in the backyard because of the way the high pressure gas line went through it. And even if they weren't wanting to put a pool in, they certainly didn't want a high pressure gas line in their backyard. So if we had not read the title report or seen that on the plotted easement map, probably would have closed escrow and ended up in a lawsuit when the buyers decided to pursue getting their pool and found out they couldn't get permits to do so. So this is why I'm telling you things like title are important, and it's your responsibility to take a look at those reports and understand what they say. If you need help, we have wonderful title reps that will help you understand what that stuff means and can also help your clients understand what it means. So that's my plug for reading your title reports. The CC&Rs is the same as we have now. So that is some good news. Same thing with review of leased or liened items. This is a contingency. So if there's any leased or liened items on the property, they have to provide the information within, the sellers provide the information within 7 days is the default, and they have 17 days to review it. And they either need to accept it, they may cancel it or accept it. That's their choices. So they can either do what's necessary to assume the lease, if it's a lease, and enter it in the necessary written agreements to do so, or they can cancel their transaction. So those are your options on leased or liened items. Okay. Removal of contingencies with the offer. So buyer shall have no obligation to remove any contractual contingency unless the seller has provided all the required documents, reports, disclosures, and information. If buyer does remove a contingency without first receiving all the required information, buyer is relinquishing any contractual rights to apply that contingency. If they remove that waiver, they're doing so against the advice of the agent, right? That's in bold. So be careful how you suggest to them to remove contingencies. But here, this is the important part. Buyer is relinquishing any contractual rights that apply to that contingency. So I have seen before that the clients, well, you know, agents that suggest that, well, if something new comes up, something new is presented, we get that 5-day window. Not so much. There's some wiggle room in that, but generally, buyer is relinquishing any contractual rights to apply a contingency once it has been removed. Okay. So again, careful removing contingencies. For any contingencies specified in this 3L or 8, they shall, within the applicable timeframe period, remove the cancellation contingency or cancel the agreement. What that means is there, we see a lot is like, well, we didn't get a contingency removal. They are agreeing to provide that contingency removal within the timeframes specified. So if you're the listing agent, make sure you are asking for it. Don't leave it open-ended. Okay. Otherwise, this is the same general language that we have now. Sale of buyer's property. So it is not contingent. The default is not contingent on the sale of buyer's property unless the COP is checked and included. All right, so discovery is no longer applicable is a question that Tim wrote. Generally, that is true. It is not applicable, except for items that relate to specific statutory disclosures. And we'll see that in just a minute. Items included and excluded from the sale. So we talked about this in the grid. Now we're getting into the details of this. So again, I feel like this is one of those areas where we're going to see some challenges with this new RPA. So I really encourage you to have conversation with your client, whichever side you are representing. There's a lot of stuff listed in here, and you want to make sure that you have clients that are receiving or leaving or excluding what they expect. And so this needs to be reviewed at the time of the offer with your seller and counter out anything that they think they should take. All right, because it's quite a lot. So all existing fixtures and fittings that are attached to the property, period, right? Existing electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, heating, ceiling fans, gas logs, yada, yada, all this stuff. I know you can read it. Built-in appliances, appliances for which special openings or encasements have been made. There's a good example of your wine fridge that is technically a standalone unit, but maybe you've had some nice cabinetry molding created to go around it so it looks like it's built in. So that would be included, whether or not checked in paragraph 3P. So in this instance, paragraph 9 really supersedes what's happening in the grid, right? So reference this section when you are talking to your seller. Window and door screens, awning, shutters, window coverings, any materials that cover any portion of the window, right? They make that really clear in here this time, right? Attached floor coverings, televisions, satellite dishes, air conditioners, pool and spa equipment. This includes any cleaning equipment such as those automatic pool cleaners, those little pool vacuum things, the nets, the pool covers, right? This was not fully clarified in our current RPA. It is now. Garage door openers, remote controls, mailboxes, in-ground landscaping, water features and fountains. So a lot of people think that, maybe they got a cute fountain for Mother's Day from their granddaughter, and it's got the little kid pouring water out of the little fountain thing, right? That's sentimental to them. They need to exclude it because water features and fountains are included. Water softeners and water purifiers, right? Water softeners typically in the garage, water purifiers is things underneath the sink, they stay. Light bulbs, they stay. Closed escrow, one of my agents closed escrow earlier this year, and every single light bulb was taken out of the house. So it is now identified in here as they stay, including the smart light bulbs, because I guess people think, smart light bulbs, dumb light bulbs, doesn't matter, they all stay. And any items specifically included in 3P, if currently existing at the time of acceptance. So remember when I told you that I think there's going to be lazy agents that just check every single box in 3P, right? That does have to actually exist. They can't check the box of the wine fridge and expect the seller to put one in. But then you come down to, did it exist or not? Sometimes buyers have seen a variety of properties and they think there's a wine fridge in this one and there's not, because that was actually in the other house. Right. So then maybe you're looking at pictures to prove that there was or wasn't. Right. So just be really, really good at reviewing this with your sellers. If seller does not intend to include any items because it is not owned by the seller, okay, whether placed on the property by the agent or a stager or third party, then that needs to be excluded as well in the counteroffer. So let's say your stager put up some kind of like draped fabric thing that partially covers a window, or maybe they put up one of those cute like bathroom fixed, shelving things over the toilet. If the stager put it up, it also needs to be excluded. No doubt this little note here is because there was some lawsuit with a stager. So make sure anything and everything is identified, excluded as needed. Security systems, okay, hardware, software control units, including but not limited to the motion detectors, the alarms, anything used for such purposes, okay, whether hardwired or not. Some of those are not hardwired and they're just sitting there, right? Still have to be included. Same thing, home automation, electronic devices, thermostats, kitchen appliances not otherwise excluded, lighting systems, again, hardwired or not wireless, with the control unit, the computer, the tablet, the phone, or other smart device, right? Any home devices that are physically affixed to the property, also existing light bulbs are included. Buyer is advised to use 3P to address more specific items, and seller is advised to use a counteroffer to more directly exclude items. Okay, non-dedicated devices. So here you see it has the control unit, computer, tablet, phone. This is clarity on that, the non-dedicated device. So sometimes you see where they have like the tablet, like an iPad that's maybe hanging on the wall that controls all of these things. That would stay. But if it is a non-dedicated device, of course, such as their phone, they have their cell phone that they use to control these things, and that's not just dedicated only to the home automation, then that would not go, right? That would not go. But if you have one that is dedicated to the home automation, that needs to stay, right? Buyer acknowledges that separate device to access Wi-Fi may be required to operate the home automation features. Buyer is advised to change all passwords to ensure the security of the home features. So remember when it talked about we have to give this information over, right? We have to give, the seller has to give the buyer all of the information regarding passwords and access. They need to do that because you can kind of see both sides, right? Now you've got a buyer who's come into the home and they don't have access to change the passwords and control those video cameras, and the old seller is now able to, look at those videos, to find out what the new buyer's got going on at their house. So make sure that you have dialogue. You are now going to be responsible for helping facilitate that transition, right? So talk to your sellers, talk to your buyer. More importantly, talk to your cooperating agent, because the agent on the other side may not be as dialed in on all this stuff as you are, because you guys are all here taking this class. Right? Talk to them, because you really should be getting that information, having that conversation with them ahead of time, and how and when and where they're going to transfer that information, right? You don't want your buyer upset with you because you didn't help them get it, right? And as a seller's agent, you don't want to be talking to them literally while their moving truck is there and saying, oh yeah, by the way, I need the passwords to everything. Right. So this is really very strongly, this whole paragraph is about having a conversation with your parties. Okay. Leased or liened, they have 7 days to disclose any information, items that are leased or liened and the information associated with it. Seller represents all items in the purchase price, unless otherwise agreed, are free of liens and encumbrances. Seller shall cooperate with the identification of any software applications and buyer's efforts to transfer service as needed to operate the home automation. So remember, the seller and the buyer, again, have a conversation so that you can be ready for that. When taking the list, Tim suggests taking the listing, bring the RPA with you and discuss inclusions and seller's responsibility. I agree. I think that's a great idea, so that they have some time to think about it and be prepared for the counteroffer, because there's no doubt they may go through all of this. There's a lot on their mind when they're replying to this and may forget something that they want to exclude. So that's a great suggestion. All right. Now that's a lot to dive into. We are moving to the top of page 7. Items excluded, much shorter paragraph here. Items excluded are identified in paragraph 3P2. So remember, there was just a couple line items there. Audio and video components such as the flat screen TVs. All right. Now here's where this changes from our current contract. So what we now have is that unless otherwise specified, the brackets attached to the walls, floor, and ceiling will be removed, and holes or other damage shall be repaired, but not painted. You guys know that that is the exact opposite of what we have now. What we have now states that the brackets will remain, or there's a checkbox that they can be removed. Now we default to them being removed, but the holes or be repaired, but not painted. You want to have a conversation with the buyer. They're going to be so excited to go to their new home, and they walk in the door and there's big spots on the wall of white patch marks from where somebody took off the brackets. Right? You want to set that expectation at this spot, or you specifically request in the checkbox in the grid for the brackets to remain, if that's what they would prefer to ask. But the default now is that they will be removed, they will be repaired, they will not be painted. So you don't want to have sad buyers all disappointed about big holes in the, or big patch marks in the walls. Okay, make sure that they know that's what's going to happen. All right, allocation of costs. All right. The reports, inspections, and certificates as specified in the grid. The grid determines who will pay for these things. It does not determine who is to pay for any work recommended or identified in the report. Agreement for payment of required work should be specified elsewhere in paragraph 3Q or 3R, or in a separate agreement such as the repair request response, an addendum, or an amendment. All right, that's where any other additional repair work that needs to be done has to get identified in here. And again, another reminder that if it's lender required repairs, it'll go on the repair request now. All right, now remember, we were given the information, we now have legally the required installation of the smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and securing of the water heater. We have the time frame for that, which is defaulted at 7 days. We have the line item where we can say who's going to pay for it. If buyers to pay for these items, they can instruct the escrow holder, so they can either give money in escrow or pay the vendor directly, right? And prior to escrow, if seller shall deliver to buyer written statement of compliance. If seller is to pay for these items and does not fulfill seller's obligation in the time specified, buyer incurs costs to comply with the lender requirements concerning these items. Seller shall be responsible for the buyer's cost. Right, so if the seller doesn't comply, they were supposed to, buyer can now do it and submit that cost into escrow. Any point of sale requirements, any point of sale inspection reports and repairs referred to, they need to be completed before or after close of escrow. Right, the parties specified are those who are responsible for the payment. They shall be repaired again prior to final verification of property. So remember this one, you have a time frame. The time frame default is 7 days. Point of sale requirements, the time frame is prior to final verification of the property. Remember, the final verification can be up to 5 days before. If you've got repairs, including point of sale requirement repairs, you need to have that done completed within the time frame so that it is done no more than 5 days before close of escrow. Okay, if buyer agrees to pay for portions, again, they can contact the vendor directly or provide the money to escrow holder to deposit the funds. Buyer shall be provided within the time frame specified. A copy of the required government conducted point of sale inspection report prepared pursuant to this agreement. Okay, so this is really the same, but it just clarifies things quite a bit more. If there is a repair, lender required repair that is not completed within the time frame, and the lender requires an additional inspection, right? So how many times have we had the appraiser has to come back out to verify the smoke alarm or the carbon monoxide? The seller shall be responsible for any corresponding reinspection fee. If buyer incurs the cost to comply with lender required concerns, the seller shall be responsible for the work for these costs. Okay, so this gives you the how many times have we had it? Well, they had to have a reinspection fee because the seller didn't do it in a timely manner. Now the buyer can submit that reinspection fee to escrow for the seller to be responsible for those costs. Okay, they are buyer and seller are advised to seek information from a knowledgeable source regarding local and state mandates regarding point of sale requirements. Agents do not have expertise in this area and cannot ascertain all of the requirements or cost of compliance. Now, of course, our clients pretty much expect us to have this expertise, but again, they put the onus back on the buyer in this contract quite a lot, and there's another spot for that. Home warranty, buyer shall choose the coverage regardless of any options coverage indicated, right? So this is a big change from what we have now. The buyer shall pay for any cost of the plan chosen by a buyer that exceeds the amount allocated to the seller. Buyer is informed that home warranty plans have many coverage options, and they are advised to investigate the coverage and select what is suitable for them. If buyer waives the purchase of a home warranty plan in the grid, they may still purchase a home warranty plan at their expense. Right, so this was just, remember I said you don't need to write in buyer to select coverage anymore. This is where it addresses that. Okay, are we good with these things? Any questions before we get into disclosures? Okay, good. Now we get to some fun stuff. Statutory and other disclosures. So we are in section 11A1. You guys can follow along. Seller shall within the time frame deliver to buyer, unless exempt, the fully completed disclosures required by the civil code. Statutory disclosures included but not limited to the TDS, the NHD, actual knowledge of illegal controlled substances, notice of tax assessments, and if seller has actual knowledge of industrial use or military location, you would use the SVQ or EDS for those. And if the property is in a high or very high fire severities area, the information, notices, and documents and agreements required by the civil code for that would be the FHDS. So they are to provide that within the time frame specified. That is going to be your 7 days is your default, unless it is within, unless that is changed. Because you love it, Tim. That is why you are in this business. You love it. All right. Allows you to go to Italy for 12 days and come back to a crash landing of this new contract. The TDS, so section 11A2. The TDS is considered fully complete if seller has completed, right here, seller has completed their section, completed and answered all questions and signed the seller information section, and the seller's agent has completed and signed the seller's agent section, or if applicable, an avid is included, right? This is not fully completed unless all the questions have been answered and the listing agent has completed their portion and included their visual inspection. Really important, you guys, that's the first 7 days. So 2 things here I want you to remember. All of the boxes are supposed to be checked. Okay, if you are doing it with them and they're doing it manually on a piece of, on the forms, go through that, make sure that they have checked all of the boxes and answered the questions appropriately. If you want to use, I know many of you probably use Glide through SkySlope. We now have a platform called Breeze, which is SkySlope sort of version of Glide. I actually think it's a little bit easier to use. The beauty of that is that it will not let them check the box that they're done until all the questions have been answered. So it'll send them back. We've all done those online forms and such where it's like you push submit and it's like, boop, nope, you didn't answer such and such question, right? So Breeze will help you make sure that you are getting fully completed document, and then you're not the bad guy either. It's the computer saying, nope, you have to answer this question. The other thing, does it also require a signature at time of completion? No, the agent is still going to have to be responsible for making sure it gets signed, because you also, as the agent, you have to complete your visual inspection. So you need to check your box that you're going to complete an avid, actually do the avid and get it all over there within the 7 days, right? Don't delay on that. I can't even tell you, sometimes I see avids coming over like the day before close, Don't do that. It's 7 days. Otherwise, you have not met that statutory requirement. Okay, and you're leaving your seller hanging out there. So please make sure that you are helping them. Like you can tell them, help, let me help you, right? Help me help you. Isn't that what they say? Help me help you. Got to have it completed and done and over within the time frame specified to satisfy that statutory requirement, right? They will acknowledge receipt of the TDS and return the buyer's agent will also complete a visual inspection, although they are not held to that 7-day time frame, but still you guys do it in the front end, right? They will conduct a reasonably competent, diligent visual inspection of the accessible areas and complete that section 4 of the TDS or an AVID. And all of that is then needs to be sent over to the buyer's agent. Seller shall have within the time frame specified, again, the 7 days, provide the supplemental disclosure, which would be utilizing the SPQ to answer all the questions, sign and deliver a copy of the buyer, unless they're exempt, in which case they can use the exempt seller disclosure. So if they're exempt from the TDS, they will also be exempt from the SPQ and can complete the ESD. Hopefully you guys know what all of those forms are and deliver that to the buyer. In the event seller or seller's agent prior to close of escrow becomes aware of adverse conditions materially affecting the property, any material inaccuracy in disclosures or information previously provided, seller shall in writing promptly provide a subsequent or amended TDS or SPQ. Any such document shall be deemed an amendment to the TDS and SPQ. However, a subsequent or amended disclosure is not required for conditions or material inaccuracies for which the buyer is otherwise aware or discovered in the buyer's reports or investigation. So if the buyer finds out, oh, the dishwasher doesn't work, right, then we would not require the seller to amend their TDS. However, if it is a big rainstorm and the seller wakes up one morning and there is rain coming through their kitchen ceiling, they now need to provide an amendment to the TDS. Okay, does that make sense in the difference? So anything that the buyer finds through their own investigation is not an amendment, does not require an amendment. Good, you guys understand all of that. That's fabulous. Okay, at the top of page 8, lead-based paint is the same as it is now. You know that needs to be provided for anything built before January 1st, 1978. They are actually changing the name of the form. It will now be called the LPD. Instead of the FLD, it will now be the LPD. So they have changed that to be lead paint disclosure, which makes more sense than what it was before, but it will throw off some people. Home fire hardening disclosure. All right, there are 2 separate statutory requirements here. You've got home fire hardening. This is for any transaction where a TDS is required and the property is located in a high or very high severity zone and the home was constructed prior to January 1st, 2010. What our brokerage is requiring, as are many other brokerages, is that we want this document whether or not it's in the fire high or very high severity zone. However, if it is in a high or very high severity zone, it is considered a statutory disclosure and absolutely must be provided. All right, this is based on anything built before January 1st, 2010, because we're talking about home fire hardening. We're talking about the materials that the home was built. So anything built after 2010 should have had new building codes that would have had home fire hardening in place. Defensible space disclosure is different in that it does not have the time frame associated with it. This is for all properties in high or very high severity zone, right? Because even if it was built last year, if they've got a bunch of bushes and stuff around the property that would make the and penetrates the defensible space area, then it would be a defensible space issue regardless of when the home was built. So we are going to be asking for these on any transaction that has a TDS, right? It either is a statutory disclosure if the property is in a high or very high severity zone, or it's being provided as a advisory. Either way, DILBEC is requiring it to be on any transaction that has a TDS. Okay, any questions about that? I know we've talked, I'm sure within all of your office meetings, there's been a lot of conversation about this. I think we're all pretty clear on it now, but this is a reminder that it is one of the statutory disclosures. Okay, well, how do you find out if it's in high or very high severity zone? You can either utilize the TDS, or you can look on the CAL FIRE map, and where you can actually put in the address and it will tell you if it's in a higher or very high severity zone. I'll give you a pinpoint on a map. Now, where you might want to do that is if you're representing the buyer, you may want to double check the CAL FIRE map or have the buyer check the CAL FIRE map if it's going to be in a high or very high severity zone ahead of time, so you know whether this is a statutory disclosure or simply an advisory. Does it?
Marilee,
Yeah.
are they now two forms or is it one form?
It is one form. One
And
form.
there's a
FHDS.
spot to check as an advisory for both spots, or just at the top where you check this is as an advisory?
This is a, yeah, just the one that's, I don't believe there's been any substantial change to the FHDS. So it should be the same form we've been using. Okay. And again, especially part of that buyer investigations too, is that if it is in a higher, very high severity zone, that's definitely should raise a red flag that they want to check on their insurance options. Because again, remember, you can't go out on loan if your insurance comes in at a $90,000 a year premium. So make sure that you get really comfortable with that CAL FIRE map. Now, the CAL FIRE map and the NHD are sometimes in conflict with each other. And the recommendation is to just err on the side of caution, but and consider the stricter one, the prevailing, but you may not always have access to TDS or NHD before you're writing or at the time of writing. So you may want to just look at the CAL FIRE map and make them aware. Okay, this is, we are in section E here. You cannot waive a statutory disclosure. Waiver of that's prohibited by law. Section F, this buyer is agreeing to return signed copies of all these documents within the time frame specified, which is 17 days. Right, so if you are the listing agent and you're trying to get your file all completed, right, you need to be asking them for copies of the signed contract or signed disclosures. They have agreed to do it. All right, so be aware of that. The termination rights. So if any disclosure or subsequent or amended disclosure is delivered to the buyer after the offer is signed, buyer has the right to terminate the agreement within 3 days of personal delivery or 5 days of electronic delivery. If buyer does not rescind in this timeframe, buyer is deemed to have approved the disclosures and does not have the right to cancellation. Right, so this is really like you want to make sure that your buyer is having the opportunity to review these documents and take it seriously. For defensible space, the buyer has to agree in writing to take on the defensible space compliance as indicated by mutual signature on the FHDS. Right, so if not, then they have the right, the buyer has the right for cancellation. So,
Marilee,
yeah.
so it's Eric. I'm sorry, I'm a little confused on this. So it says 5 days or the 17, whichever is later, but now termination of rights is 5 days on the next paragraph.
It is, there's a conflict in the language of this contract, in my opinion. Because this really says it's 5 days, anytime that it's given after the signed offer for the statutory disclosures. These are just the statutory disclosures.
Okay.
Not all
But
of them.
not the, well, the TDS is a statutory, but SPQ is not.
Correct.
So I return my TDS, but I don't return my SPQ, and then I bail on day 17 because I don't like something in the SPQ. Listing agent looks like an idiot.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so
Okay.
those obviously in whatever it is, paragraph 3 something, right? 3L3 or whatever, we need to, as listing agents, we need to make sure those dates are getting a little bit closer to something more reasonable. You know, like 3 or 5 days after delivery. I don't know how you do that because it doesn't give you the 3 or 5 days after delivery. They gives you a specific time. So deliver it, have them done before your
Have them
offers
done
are accepted,
before.
and deliver them right away and make it 5 days.
Yep. Now remember, this is after the offer is signed. All right. And while it doesn't specify this in here, I do have a training manual from CAR that says if buyer receives disclosures before signing the RPA, there is no cancellation period for your disclosures. So
Yeah,
while
I asked that of Gov once, and Gov
Mhm.
said no. So I asked that because that specific sentence you just said, if I give this to you during counter offers and you accept the counter offer, all those disclosures are deemed accepted.
And he
However,
said-
Gov Hutchinson said, no, that's not true.
Well, they have a document that says it is. Like I said, I personally feel like there's some contradictory information in here. Because they do have 17 days for their buyer investigations, which includes disclosures. They're not separately identified within the grid. So I think we will be looking for additional clarity from CAR on that.
But to Eric's point, if you are expecting it to be deemed accepted, I would counter on there to release contingencies and have them sign the contingency release form to be clear about it.
Yes, I would agree. If you don't want to utilize this language as your ability to say that they don't have rescission rights, then you just need to include a contingency release and have them sign that. And then it's very clear.
Agreed.
All right. Okay. Withholding taxes. This is good news here. These next few paragraphs are substantially the same as what we have now. Escrow is instructed to withhold the applicable required amount for the federal and California withholding. Okay, this defaults to that escrow will withhold. Withholding is a federal requirement. So unless they provide the seller's affidavit to the buyer or escrow acts as a qualified substitute, then the escrow will withhold. All right, so this is where we talk about the need for FRIPTA again, and one of those things, again, it's not just oh yeah, another box to check on our checklist. You want to make sure that you either are receiving the seller's affidavit or that the escrow is acting as a qualified substitute. Okay, if you have any questions about that, you can have further dialogue too with your manager or your mentor. We always have a lot of questions about withholding, but we can't get too deep into the weeds on that one today, or we'll never get through here. Megan's Law database and disclosure notice regarding gas and hazardous liquid transmission pipelines. Those are the same as we have now. The condominium and plan development disclosure, that is the same. They are going to seller's going to disclose to the buyer. They're going to have 3 days to get that order the documents from the HOA, and then the buyer has their 17 days to review those, assuming you stay within your default timeframes. The natural and environmental hazards, this is the same. This is that the seller is going to provide those booklets And we all used to run around with those booklets that the NHD company would provide. But do note that those are available in the ePubs forms library. So you can send them out digitally that way through the ePubs, which is available both on Zip Forms and in SkySlope. So you can send them that way and not have to worry about having books that you're dealing with. All right, top of page 9. Reminder, seller shall disclose known material facts and defects, including insurance claims from the past 5 years. Remember that the seller is required to disclose any material fact, whether they're exempt from filling out the TDS and SPQ or not, right? Disclosing material facts is required regardless of their status there. Okay, section 12, buyer's investigation of property and matters affecting the property. Buyers shall, within the time frame specified and at their expense, unless otherwise agreed, conduct their inspections, investigations, test surveys, and such. This is what they are calling a 3-pronged right. Okay, a 3-pronged right. So we've got section 1, 2, and 3 here within section 12B. So section 1 is the inspections regarding physical attributes of the property or items connected to the property. So this is going to be your home inspection, lead-based paint, termite, any other inspections regarding the physical condition of the land and the improvements, right? Physical attributes of the property, right? Prong 2 is any other buyer investigations. This would be such as your insurance, your neighborhood, anything that is outside of the physical attributes specifically of the property, but again, like insurance, permits, neighborhood nuisances and such. Section 3, the 3rd prong, are the reports and disclosures provided by the seller and delivered to the buyer. Right, so there's all of your disclosures and any additional reports, your NHD report and so forth. All of that is going to be your 3rd prong. So these are the 3 prongs of buyer investigation of the property. We have for years talked about your inspections, like your physical inspections. We now need to think of it as investigation, and it's all 3 of these areas. The contingency release is being updated to allow you to release contingencies, individual, each of these individual prongs, any of these specific areas. So you could release your investigation of the physical attributes, but perhaps not the reports and disclosures, right? So you can choose. If you are using a notice to perform, though, that is going to ask for all of these, the full 12B, to be released at one time. So just be aware that those changes within the contingency release and the notice to perform. Okay, without seller's prior written consent, buyers shall not make or cause to make invasive or destructive buyer investigations, except minimally invasive testing from the pest control report, which shall not include any holes or drilling through stucco, except for the pest control report. And we've all had that termite inspector that goes through and pushes big holes in the eaves every 6 inches. But otherwise, it shall be no invasive or destructive testing, right? Including they shall not, without written consent of the seller, inspections by any government building, zoning inspection, or government employee unless required by law. So this would be a defensible space, right? Defensible space inspection would require a government employee to come out, and that would require seller's written consent. Sellers shall make property available for buyer investigations. They are not obligated to move any existing personal property. All right, so if you've got a hoarder house, good luck with that. Sellers shall have water, gas, electricity, and all operable pilot lights on through the date of possession. Okay, so they can't just turn them on for the inspection period and then turn them back off. And where it's pilot lights in here, because how many times do we have properties tinted at the end of the transaction, right before occupancy. The gas gets turned off for that. Gas company comes back on to turn the gas back on at the time, after the termite tinting. And now it's red tagged and they're not turning on the pilot lights because there's a problem. Okay. So this is to be on through possession. And buyers shall complete buyer's investigations and satisfy themselves to the condition of the property in the time frame specified. Okay. Seller, let's see, so give completed copies of all such reports to the buyer, obtained by the buyer. So the buyer has to give copies to the seller of any of their reports if it has been requested. All of these obligations survive the termination of this agreement. So again, if the agreement gets canceled, and because maybe something they found in the inspection reports, they still have to give a copy of the report to the seller. If the agreement is completed because it's close of escrow, but the pilot light's not on, the seller is still responsible for that pilot light. Delivery of investigation reports shall not include appraisal, except if the appraisal is received in connection with the FHA or VA. So as far as giving the appraisal, remember, if you're going out on, if you're canceling based on an appraisal contingency, then you do give a copy of the appraisal if the seller requests it. But if they're going out on something else, you don't have to give a copy of the appraisal unless it's an FHA or VA loan. That would be because appraisal is considered a matter of opinion for most properties. But when it's FHA or VA, it's a material fact to the property because that appraisal stays with the property for 6 months, right? So in that case, maybe they're going out on inspection of some sort, but they have an FHA appraisal, they still need to give the FHA appraisal over. Make sense? Okay, good. Buyer shall keep the property free and clear of liens and repair all damages arising from buyer investigation, indemnify and hold seller harmless from all resulting liability. Buyer shall carry, or buyer shall require anyone acting on buyer's behalf to carry policy of liability and workman's comp and other applicable insurance, defending and protecting the seller from liability for any injury or persons or property occurring during the buyer's investigation or work done on the property at buyer's direction prior to close of escrow. I hope all of our home inspectors are out there making sure that they have applicable insurance. It is the buyer's responsibility to make sure that anyone acting on their behalf has proper insurance. Seller is advised that certain protections may be afforded the seller by a notice of non-responsibility. So you do have access to that in your forms for buyer's investigation and work done on the property. Buyer's obligation under this paragraph shall survive termination of the agreement. So again, inspector goes in, finds some things that the buyer perhaps doesn't like and puts his foot through the ceiling. Buyer cancels contract, right? The contract has now been terminated. Buyer is still responsible for the damage that was done to the property. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. It is definitely more clear than we have now. And this is a good thing. You're right. Get into title investing. This is really the same general language that we have now. No major changes here. Buyers shall within the time frame be provided a prelim, right? They are going to take title based on its current encumbrances and easements. They have 7 days to give seller has 7 days to give escrow the necessary information to clear the title, right? They have to disclose to buyer matters affecting title. This one is new language here. Buyer is a legal entity and the property purchase price is at least $300,000 and the purchase is made without a bank loan. Okay, so this is a cash buyer that's at least $300,000 and it's an entity, not a person, right? They may need to comply with the geographic targeting order. Okay, and they agree to cooperate with the title company's efforts to comply with the geographic targeting order. All right, so that's just going, it's just really the government is, the Department of Treasury is verifying the source of those funds. All right, that's basically what is happening there. But this is a new paragraph and the buyers are expected to comply if they meet those criteria. All right, this is the same at the end of escrow. The buyer will receive a grant deed conveying the title to the property. Manners of taking title may have significant legal consequences, and they will want to consult an appropriate professional. Top of page 10, buyers shall receive a homeowner's title policy insurance at the end of the transaction. We are at the top of page 10, section 14. All right, some good news here. Section 14 is one that talks about buyer investigations. We have referenced section 14B many times over the years in our contract. And so the good news is this is one thing that hasn't changed. When you're talking about the buyer's investigations, you can reference again 14B. But here we are, top of section 14. A reminder that the following time periods may only be extended, altered, or modified by mutual agreement. Any removal of contingencies or cancellations must be exercised in good faith. Right, seller shall, within the time frame specified, and that is 7 days is the default, deliver to buyer all reports. Right, you've got all those things on your that we've discussed, and they're in the grid and they're identified in section 11, all of the things that the buyer has to, or the seller has to provide to the buyer. The buyer then has their time to review it. That is a default of 17 days to their investigations, review the disclosures, reports, the lease documents, and so forth. Right? Any matters affecting the title and so on and so forth. So buyer may, within the time frame specified, request that the seller make repairs or take any other action regarding the property. We're in B2. Seller has no obligation to agree or even to respond to the buyer's request. Sometimes we feel like, well, we're just waiting for the buyer to respond. We don't have to remove contingencies until they do. Not really the case. They do not have an obligation to even respond. The form repair request should be used for request, and then of course the RRR is the seller's response. Those are the appropriate documents to use. If seller does not agree or does not respond, buyer is not contractually entitled to have repairs or other requests made. They may only cancel based on the contingencies. So that's their only option. Take it or leave it is kind of the deal. Buyer shall, at the end of the time frame, deliver to the seller removal of the applicable contingencies. However, if any report, disclosure, or information to which the seller is responsible, other than those in paragraph 11A and B, 11A and B are statutory disclosures, okay, is not delivered within the time frame specified, then buyer has 5 days after delivery, or within the 17 days, whichever is later, to deliver removal of the applicable contingency or cancel the agreement. If any delivery or report occurs after a contractual contingency pertaining to the report has already been waived or removed, delivery of the report does not revive the contingency. There may be a right of termination under 11G, and 11G is again back to those statutory disclosures. So again, if you've got statutory disclosures where you have, you may have a right to revive that contingency. Otherwise, if you have waived or removed your contingency, the receiving the delivery of the report does not revive it. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Because we frequently hear people say, well, we've got new information so we can get out on that. Not necessarily, right? Not necessarily. Even after end of the time frame specified, and before the seller cancels, buyer retains the right to either remove remaining contingencies or cancel the agreement. Once buyer's written removal of contingencies is delivered to seller, seller may not cancel this agreement pursuant to paragraph 14C. right? So you've got these seller rights for cancellations and buyer right for cancellations. We'll look at those very quickly. Sellers do not have a lot of rights for cancellation. Just please make sure you're muted if you are, unless you have a question. All right, so where's seller's right to cancel? Seller has the right to cancel based on contingencies. So if buyer does not deliver to seller a removable applicable contingency, they have the right to cancel if buyer is not completing their contractual obligation. So some of those things would be deposit funds being received in a timely manner, delivering updated contact information for the lender, right? That is a contractual obligation. There's a variety of contractual obligations provided throughout the contract. So if they are not meeting contractual obligation, seller has a right to cancel. Seller also has a right to cancel in the event that they have a contingency for a home of choice and they have not exercised that opportunity. In any of these three cases, seller shall also authorize the return of the buyer's deposit, right? Because you see that here, you see that at the end of 2, and you see it at the end of 3. So if the seller wants to cancel based on any of these things, then they are authorizing the release of the buyer's deposit. The buyer has the right to cancel if the seller does not deliver the to remove the applicable contingencies or cancellation. So they have all of their, of course, their contingencies, right? They have their right to cancel based on a seller's contractual obligation. So a seller is not delivering things in the time frame specified. And then if they have any other contingency in place. So if you've got a seller contingency, a seller contract obligation, and a buyer contingency, any of these can lead to a buyer's right to cancel. Okay. Otherwise, everyone is agreeing to proceed. The notice to perform, you will notice, no longer has the space for the time frame to be changed. So it used to say 2 days or and have a line. That is now just a firm 2 days. Okay. Again, we're at the top of page 11, section E here. The bottom of this paragraph. If notice to buyer to perform or notice to seller to perform is incorrectly delivered or specifies a time less than the agreed time, the notice shall be deemed invalid and void and will be required to deliver a new notice for buyer to perform or seller to perform. And in a few minutes, we'll get to the glossary. We'll talk about how you count the days, but you can't give this early, right? It is not supposed to be within the time frame specified no earlier than 2 days prior to the scheduled performance date. Right, so if our scheduled performance date is on Wednesday, you cannot give it any earlier than Monday. So if you were to then give it on Saturday, maybe you're going out of town or something, and you're like, I just want to get this over with, I'm going to go ahead and send it out early. It is void and invalid, and you'd have to start over. So don't try giving it early in hopes of just expediting the process, right? It cannot be any more than 2 days prior to the scheduled performance date, and you have to give them 2 days. If you want to make any change in your 2-day window here, you'd have to do that in an amendment. Okay. Same thing here with the demand to close. It no longer has an option to add any of these days. It is a firm 3 days. You have to give them 3 days after delivery to close escrow, and it may not be delivered any earlier than 3 days prior to the scheduled performance date for the close of escrow. So this one is your 3-day period. Okay, so there's no variance on those timeframes. We're going to mute a few people. Okay. Okay, so any questions about those? All right, now remember with your notice to perform, you're giving them time to perhaps it's either complete a contingency removal or meet a contractual obligation. If they don't do that, then you're opening up that window of their time. They're exercising that option of not removing their contingency, can then be canceled, but you are opening the need, the buyer's deposit to be refunded, whereas demand to close does not, okay? But it is important to be very clear on what these dates are and how we manage the counting of days, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. Okay, if buyer and seller give written notice of cancellation, parties agree to sign and deliver mutual instructions to cancel the sale and release deposits, if any, to the party entitled to the funds. Okay, fees and costs paid by escrow holder on behalf of that party if required by this agreement, and any escrow cancellation fees to that party. Fees and costs may be payable to service providers and vendors for services and products provided during escrow. A release of funds will require mutual signed release instructions from the parties or judicial decision or arbitration award. So remember, you have to have both parties sign for the funds to be released. You can't just say, well, don't worry, Mr. Seller or Mr. Buyer, you're going to get this money, right? Because it doesn't happen automatically unless both parties sign. If both parties don't sign, then it has to go to judicial decision or arbitration award. If a party may be subject to a civil penalty for refusing to sign cancellation if no good faith dispute exists. Now, this language is in our existing RPA, although most people don't really look for it or haven't seen it. Now, I don't know that this $1,000 is enough to scare very many people, but you should at least point it out if you have somebody that is being refusing to sign instructions and there's no good faith dispute option. Note that neither agent nor escrow are qualified to provide any opinion on whether the party has acted in good faith or which party is entitled to the deposited funds. They're advised to seek an attorney in this matter. So just be aware. You've even heard recently of some stories where people have, where sellers had chosen not to sign cancellation instructions and release the deposit, even though the buyer was well within their rights to cancel based on their timeframes and not having released their contingencies, and they went through their inspection and didn't want to proceed with the property, and the seller just flat out refused to sign. That money gets held up until both parties come to an agreement, or it goes through the legal process. So just be aware and be careful promising money getting returned to someone. Okay, section 15 repairs. This is the same as it is now, but I always like to point it out. They shall be completed prior to final verification of condition. This is not prior to occupancy. This is prior to final verification of condition. So remember, that has to be done at least 5 days before close of escrow. Repairs will be performed at the seller's expense, may be performed by the seller or through others, provided the work is completed, complies with applicable laws, including governmental permits and inspections and approval requirements. Guess what, guys? There's a lot of things that require permits that you may not realize. So if you've got the seller wants to do their own work, they are agreeing to comply with the law, including the permits, right? So it's generally better to have somebody else do that and take on that responsibility. Repairs shall be performed in a good, skillful manner with materials of quality and appearance comparable to existing materials, right? So you got to tell your seller you can't go out on the cheap and put in cheap stuff if that's not what you have now. Buyer acknowledges that the exact restoration of appearance or cosmetic items following repairs may not be possible. So you got to let your buyer know they'll fix it. It may not look exactly the same, but it is supposed to be it is supposed to be comparable, right? Seller shall obtain the invoices, paid receipts for repairs performed by others, provide a written statement indicating repairs performed by the seller, the date of repairs, and provide copies of invoices and paid receipts and statements to buyer prior to final verification of condition. Guess what, buyer's agent? If you wrote a repair request and you asked them to repair stuff, you better be having dialogue with that listing agent that you expect the invoices and the receipts to be provided prior to final verification of condition. You need to ask for that. You need to have it in your file. Okay, so make sure that you understand this. If you're representing the seller, make sure they understand they're going to have to turn this over prior to final verification of condition. Particularly if you've got repairs going on, I would highly recommend that you schedule that final walkthrough in those, as early as you can on that 5th day or 4th day before close of escrow, in case there's a problem or in case you need to, they haven't completed repairs, and don't wait until just the day of and think that it's something else to check off the box. There's a reason why we have that final walkthrough. Final verification of condition. Buyer has the right to make a final verification of the property condition with the time frame specified. That defaults to 5 days. This is not a contingency of the sale. It is to confirm that the property was maintained pursuant to the agreement, right? Remember, it was there supposed to keep the lawn mowed and the pool clean and all that stuff. That repairs have been completed as agreed, and seller has complied with seller's other obligation. Okay, so this is not a contingency. However, they may have other legal remedies that they can take. If the seller has not complied, it would be considered a breach of contract. Prorations of property taxes and other items. This is the same. The escrow will prorate property taxes, HOAs, and so forth based on a 30-day month. Section 18 is a reminder of compensation. Remember, seller and buyer or both agree to pay compensation as specified in what? A separate written agreement. What never goes into a purchase contract or counteroffer? That would be compensation. We never, ever, ever put compensation in the purchase agreement or a counteroffer. That needs to be addressed in a separate written agreement, right? You can use the cooperating broker compensation form for that. This talks about the duty of the broker. Okay, the role of the agent in the transaction pretty much says we're not going to do very much, quite frankly. So just be aware of what is listed as technically your scope of duty, although I know we all do quite more than this as a courtesy to our clients. Most importantly, we are not attorneys and we should not be giving legal or tax advice. So please remember to stay in your lane. Top of page 12, the joint escrow instructions to the escrow holder, right? Remember, these are joint escrow instructions. Purchase agreement is the California Presidential Purchase Agreement and joint escrow instructions. So escrow is a party to this. And they are being held to look, all of these line items, all of these paragraphs, it is the escrow's responsibility for being the third party to hold everybody to task on that. So that is the same as it is now. If we get into section C, the buyer and seller both agree that they are going to sign the original instructions within the time frame in the grid, which is 5 days, and then execute any additional instructions or documents within 3 days from receipt. Okay, so make sure that they're doing that, and that they are also ordering those HOA documents within those 3 days, right? It should all be within the timeframes identified in the grid. Copies of the counteroffer, the agreement and the counteroffer will be delivered to escrow within 3 days. Again, a reminder, agents are actually not party to the escrow and are being compensated under a separate written agreement. So that is a reminder there again as well. All right, so this is just all identifying escrow's role. Section 20, agents do not guarantee the work or performance of any vendors. We know that. Section 21, the MLS, we talked earlier that MLS is not a contractual, as far as inclusions and exclusions are not contractual. Agents are authorized to report the MLS that the offer has been accepted, and then upon close of escrow, the sale price to be published, right? Buyer acknowledges, right? We're in section 21, third row down. Buyer acknowledges any pictures, videos, floor plans, or other information about the property that has been or will be input into the MLS or other internet portals at the instruction of the seller, will not be removed after close of escrow. The civil code requires the MLS to maintain images and information for at least 3 years, and as a result, they may be displayed or circulated on the internet, which cannot be controlled or removed by the seller or their agents. The sellers and seller or seller's agents, buyer's agents, and MLS have no obligation or ability to remove such images from the internet. Right now, I know some MLSs will allow it to go non-public, but quite frankly, once things are out there on the internet, it's nearly impossible to pull it all back. All right, so make sure that if you've got buyers that are really concerned, and I know some of them are, they get concerned, they don't want the 3D imaging or the floor plan or those pictures for personal privacy issues. I understand that. Unfortunately, we cannot make any promises that any of that is going to go away. Once it's out on the internet, it's out on the internet. The seller actually signs a similar agreement in the listing agreement that they acknowledge that those things are out there as well. All right, attorneys' costs and fees, of course, will go to the prevailing party in the event that we needed to do that. Assignment, we talked about assignment a little bit earlier. We've now reached that section of the contract. So buyer shall have the right to assign all of buyer's interests in this agreement to the buyer's own trust or wholly owned entity of the buyer that is in existence at the time of such agreement. So we see sometimes they write it in the name of the parties, but then they want to actually take title in the trust. So they can do that without requiring the seller to have, the seller doesn't have to agree to an assignment if the buyer is assigning it to their own trust or wholly owned entity. Previous training, we had clients asking, like agents asking, what is wholly owned, right? That would be fully 100% owned by the buyers. That is on page 1. So otherwise, if they want to request an assignment, they have to obtain separate written agreement from the seller for a specified assignee. So this is where, remember I said you can't write or assignee and leave that open-ended. It has to be a specified assignee. And they have to request that within the time frame identified in the grid, which defaults to 17 days. Such consent shall not be unreasonably withheld. Okay. Prior to any assignment, buyer shall disclose to the seller the name of the assignee and the amount of any monetary consideration between buyer and assignee. Buyer shall provide assignee with all documents related to this agreement and the agreement and any disclosures. If assignee is wholly owned entity or a trust of the buyer, that assignee does not need to re-sign or initial all documents. Whether or not the assignment requires the seller's consent at the time of the assignment, assignee shall deliver a letter from the assignee's lender that the assignee is pre-qualified or approved as specified in paragraph 6B. Okay, should they fail to deliver the letter, seller, after first giving an assignee a notice to buyer to perform, shall have the right to terminate the assignment, not the whole agreement. Buyer shall, within the time frame specified, deliver request to assign this agreement for the seller's consent. Buyer fails to provide the required information, seller's withholding of consent shall be deemed reasonable. Any total or partial assignment shall not relieve the buyer of the buyer's obligation to pursue this agreement unless otherwise agreed. So, summary here: the buyer can assign it to their wholly owned entity or trust. In that case, they don't need the seller's agreement. They don't have to have everything re-signed. If they're assigning it to anything else, they do have to request the seller's agreement. They have to do that in the time frame. They have to make that request in the time frame identified in the grid, which defaults to 17 days. Seller cannot unreasonably withhold their agreement, but buyer has to perform by providing the signed documents and approval letter and such to the seller. And any total or partial assignment does not relieve the original buyer of their full obligation unless otherwise agreed. And there you go. It's been capitalized again, right? If you're going to do an assignment, you use the OAAA form. That's where the details of the assignment would be completed by the buyer and provided to the seller for agreement and signature. All right, we all good on assignment?
No. I have two quick questions. Well, I bet you they're not that quick. The entity, if it's an LLC, if they create it after the offer is accepted, you know, like on my house would be 829 Frederick LLC. Sometimes buyers create those after they have an offer accepted. It says prior to, right?
Any wholly owned entity that is in existence at the time of such assignment. So if you have time to create a wholly owned entity, as long as it's in existence at the time of assignment.
Now, I put it in my trust. Do I need to go back and sign every single solitary document as the trustee?
No, if assignee, so here, can you see my thing, is a wholly owned entity or trust, that assignee does not need to re-sign or initial all the documents.
Yeah, I just want to make sure Dilbeck's cool with that paragraph as well, because I might have argued that one in the past.
I don't know if I'm not aware if we are going to have stricter requirements on that or not. But I think it's pretty clear in here.
Very clear. Thank
Yeah. All right. Equal housing. Is that good on assignment? Everyone's good? Awesome. Equal housing, of course, we will follow all of the equal housing compliance. Definitions. All right, there's a few gotchas in here. So I know we're heading into the end of this. We might be around just a couple minutes past 1 o'clock, but I think we'll get out of here pretty close to that. But there's a few things you really need to pay attention to in here. First one here is acceptance. These are terms. And I know it's easy to just gloss over the glossary, but there's a few terms in here you really need to know. So acceptance means at the time the offer or the final counter offer is fully executed in writing by the recipient and delivered, C, capital D, delivered to the offering party or their authorized agent. You guys all are familiar with confirmation. In the past, acceptance has been at confirmation. Confirmation is going away. It is now at delivery. Okay, so we're going to pop down here and see what delivery means. I'm actually going to skip a few of these. We'll come back to them because I want to stay on this path of thinking. What does delivery mean? Deliver, delivered, and delivery of documents means personal receipt of the document by the buyer or seller or their authorized agent. What does receipt mean? Copy of the document or applicable link to the document is in the possession of the party or the authorized agent, regardless of delivery method used. Can be email, text, etc. An electronic copy of the document or applicable link has been sent to any of the designated electronic delivery addresses specified in the real estate broker section, which you'll see in a moment. Right? After acceptance, agent may change the designated electronically delivery address in writing. But this is the important part. Okay. What does this mean? This means that if they send it to you, it is considered delivered. So if you have an offer out and they send you the counter offer or the executed contract, if they send it to you, that is considered acceptance. Does that make sense? This is very different than what we have now. And they could send you a link via text, and that is considered acceptance. Okay? Best thing I can tell you guys, you have one day. If you need a new phone, a tablet, or something, whatever you use you need to make sure that when you are receiving communication from a cooperating agent, it is going, if they, as long as they can prove that they sent it, the responsibility is on you to open it and receive it, right? You don't have to prove that you received it. As long as they prove that they sent it, that's where your timeframes start. All right, surprised we don't have questions on that, but please just be aware that it is delivery is at the time it is sent. Okay, if you have not received it, so recipient link notifies the sender in writing within 3 days that they can't open it, then it can be, then it's considered, that they didn't receive it, then it can restart. But then you would have to know that you didn't get it to be able to send the delivery, and you only have 3 days to do that. So more importantly, please have a device, your email, your text that you're going to check regularly. And really, this is important, is communicating back and forth with the cooperating agent. If you were expecting something and you didn't get it, reach out to them and make sure that, ask them if they sent it, where did they send it, and so forth. Having your confirmation of receipt would be more valuable, no, than electronically. So yeah, so what I'm saying is that in the past, delivery acceptance was at confirmation. So you send it, and it wasn't until somebody confirms that they received it that your timeframes start. So now, if you send it, your timeframes start. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And to that end, we're going to talk about timeframes and days and how you count these days. Remember, we talked about counting days, and days, capital D, is based on how you count the days up here in section I. So counting days is as follows. The first day after an event is the full calendar date following the event and ending at 12:59. Okay, so if we have acceptance today is day 0, and we start counting, tomorrow is day 1. Okay, it doesn't matter if you get it this morning at 8 a.m. or you get it tonight at 10 p.m. Today is day 0 and tomorrow is day 1, and that's how you start counting 1, 2, 3, 4. As far as scheduled performance day, so this is regards to like our notice to perform, right? You cannot have a scheduled performance day on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. So if your contingency date, say, was supposed to be up on Saturday, maybe the Saturday before Labor Day, then you would always roll forward. You never roll back. You would roll forward. It would not be due until technically would be, if it was a normal weekend, would be Monday. But let's say it's a Labor Day weekend, it wouldn't actually be due until Tuesday, right? So you cannot have a performance date on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. All right, so when you're counting those days, again, start with day 0, tomorrow is day 1, you're counting forward. If you are looking at your calendar and that lands on a weekend, you're gonna have to roll it forward to the first weekday. That's not a legal holiday. All right, in regards to sellers staying in possession, for that, the date of close of escrow is day 0 and tomorrow is day 1. And that's how you're going to count if they're staying for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, etc. Right? So are we really clear on how to count days and what delivery and acceptance looks like? Oh, good. So either you guys have all checked out and asleep, or you're super on top of it and you understand everything that we're saying.
So excited.
Super exciting. Everybody's going to ask for a new phone and tablet for Christmas because you're going to make sure that you are 100% connected all the time for any document that you receive. All right, terms and conditions, right? This is basically time is of the essence, all of those fun things that we have now. This is the same. Legally authorized signer right? This is in regards to what we currently think of as our representative capacity, right? It's now a legally authorized signer. And wherever the signature or initials of the legally authorized signer appear, it shall be deemed in representative capacity and not individual capacity unless otherwise indicated. The legally authorized signer represents that they are the person acting in good standing to do business in California and they shall deliver to the other party and escrow holder within the time frame specified. It's specified in there as 3 days, and it doesn't give you a chance to change it. Evidence of authority to act in that capacity, right? So that could be the copy of the trust, certification of trust, court order, power of attorney, corporate resolution, any of these documents that show that John Smith, who is signing on behalf of ABC entity, has the authority to sign on behalf of ABC entity, right? So they have 3 days to provide that to both the other party and to escrow. So we have historically utilized the representative capacity signature disclosure. That document, while it's still in the forms library, will not be required if it is identified in paragraph 32, which we'll get to in just a second. You'll have a chance to fill all that out in there. It's really just kind of taken the RCSD document and embedded it into the RPA. So we don't have another document floating around. All right, you guys understand legally authorized signer? All right, good news here. Liquidated damages, mediation, and arbitration are all the same as they were before. They do need both of the liquidated damages and the arbitration need both parties to initial within these boxes for those clauses to be valid. Mediation is just a given, right? So they're agreeing to mediate no matter what. However, arbitration are optional and they do have to sign those individually. The change here is it does have a line item where they can choose who the arbitration provider will be prior to, at the time of the contract. So I'm not sure how often we might need to utilize that, but it does give you that option. Otherwise, this stuff is the same. So that's nice. We get to continue on. All right. Now at the top of page 15, I know you guys are getting very excited and very tired of hearing me talk. Top of 18, remember expiration of offer has been put into 3C of the grid. So that's going to be at the front. No, we're accustomed to seeing at the very end of the contract. It's now at the front of the contract. Just a reminder that seller has no obligation to respond to an offer made. No obligation to respond. Okay, but the expiration is within the grid. Entity buyers. So what we just talked about is a representative capacity, right? If this paragraph is completed, a representative capacity signature disclosure is not required. All right, so you would check this box if the buyer is an entity. All right, you would put the full name of the buyer. Remember when we talked earlier, very beginning of the morning, about you can have an abbreviated name if it's a lengthy name of a trust with the date and all of that stuff, right? So if you have an abbreviated name at the front, you can have the full name that would go here where you've got this nice long 2-line section. The name of the legally authorized signer would go here. So the name of the signer, the full name of the entity, and then it has the buyer's signature. So whether it's an entity buyer or not, you're going to have your buyer's sign and print and date. And then if it is a entity buyer, you would then check this box and add their signer and title. Okay, you've got room here for 2 of those. If there's more than 2 signatures, then you can use the additional signature addendum. Okay, so this is how that RCSD is just incorporated into the regular buyer signature line. Hopefully all that makes sense. All right, so that's where your buyers sign. Section 33, we scroll down and now we're looking at the seller section. So this is acceptance. It's either acceptance subject to a counteroffer, right? We no longer have the line here to add a date It's just a counter offer. You could also accept it as a backup offer and include the backup offer addendum. Entity seller, this is the same thing as we have above. If the seller is a trust, you would put the legally authorized seller signers here and the entity name here. And you've got room here for their signature. So this is an irregular, just regular person transaction, signature, date, and printed name of seller. If they are an entity, you would do that and check the box, put their signer's name and title. All right, so we've got that. Again, same thing. If it's more than 2 people, you add the ASA. You've got a spot here. If the offer was not accepted, no counter offer being made. You can have this initialed and dated and send back. We see a lot of agents requesting that with the so many multiple offers. As we scroll down here to section 16, this is important. This goes back to that delivery section, right? So top half is the agents for the buyer. Section A, section B is for the seller. All right, so buyer's broker, firm and license number, the agent, license number, date, agent, license number, date. Remember that this does not take the place of completing section 2, the beginning and the very first page where you have agency confirmation. That still needs to be fully completed, but it needs to be completed here as well. If you have more than one agent from the same firm, you can also use the AAA, or more than one brokerage would be the additional brokerage acknowledgement. This is where you're going to identify the agents. And then remember I talked about the designated electronic delivery addresses. Here is your email and your text number. You can also have an alternate. If you wanted to have, you can check that box for its alternate, just send it to alternate only. But if they send something to these locations, having it sent is considered delivered. Okay, and you add your address in here. The seller's firm is exactly the same thing. Again, designated delivery address to be filled out by seller's agent. So if you are representing the listing and you're sending this over for the seller to sign, when you are doing that, especially if you're going to do it in DocuSign and you have seller signature sign everything, don't forget that you need to complete this portion, not just signature, but this portion needs to be included as well. So use your text box within the DocuSign if you're doing it that way to fill this out. And again, same thing if you're the buyer's agent, it's gonna be easier to remember to do that when you're the buyer's agent and you're completing the whole form. Whereas seller's agent, you need to remember to do that at the time that you are accepting or responding to the offer. And we've got this section here on escrow holder acknowledgement. That's what we've got now. We've got an area for the presentation of offer. That's what we've got now. And then woohoo, we have made it to the end of this contract. Question, has anyone checked with MLS Connect folks about having this stuff line up? I've seen it line up better in some MLS Connects, such as some are better than others on having it all line up based on your MLS and which form platform you use. So quite frankly, ZipForms does a better job than SkySlope on pulling over the agent information, although I know that SkySlope is working on improving that. And then I have also found that some MLSs are better at sending it over, mapping it than others, it seems. So I would say what the thing is about this designated electronic delivery address, remember, this is not supposed to be filled out by the listing agent. Not supposed to be filled out by the buyer's agent at the time they're writing the offer. This needs to be filled out by the seller's agent when they either accept or counter. Okay, so that needs to be filled out because this is specific designated electronically delivery address. I would make sure that your contact information in the MLS is accurate and up to date. And please make sure that whatever email address that you are including in here is something that you can easily access and that you are comfortable receiving links to documents. Because remember back in here, it talks about the links, which could be Dropbox, Google Drive, that kind of thing. So you may want to test it out if you're not familiar with utilizing links.
Marilee, I have a question for you.
Uh-huh.
This one should be a little pretty easy. There's 2 lines for agents with the same brokerage. Do we need to do the AAA if there's only 2 agents?
No, Mona has said that that's not a necessary form, as long as it's identified here. And however, if you've got 2 agents and you don't have them both identified in the agency confirmation section, and you have both agents on the transaction, then you would use the agency confirmation form.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.